Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku became a quirkless vigilante. If you guys enjoy this movie, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story WyvernofStories from AO3. So let's start the video. Izuku was 4 years old. Their mama had just taken them to the doctor to see why their quirk was taking so long to come in. The doctor was a stout man that, even at that young age, Izuku thought was kind of creepy. After the numerous tests, Izuku was diagnosed quirkless. For some reason, his mama stopped smiling. She dragged him into the car. She didn't notice that she was holding his arm too tight. The drive home was silent, and when they got home, Izuku was sent to their room. Mama and Daddy were yelling about something. They didn't know why, they didn't get it. Later that day, Izuku was excitedly talking to 𝗀𝐻 about being heroes together when 𝗀𝐻 yelled at him that he couldn't be a hero without a quirk. Izuku didn't understand. He knew that many heroes didn't use their quirk to fight, like 𝗀𝗟, 𝗀𝐷𝗟 𝐸𝐻. So what if they didn't have a quirk? They were gonna be a hero no matter what. 𝗀𝐻 didn't like that. The walk home was painful as starbursts that would eventually become pale scars bloomed across their shoulder. Izuku tried to tell Daddy what happened. He just said they deserved it, and that 𝗀𝐻 was right for putting Izuku in their place. Mama just looked it through them and sighed. Izuku didn't understand why Mama didn't stand up to Daddy, but they went upstairs anyways. Soon Daddy barged into Izuku's room and yelled at them to get out. Izuku didn't understand at first, so they just stood there numbly until Daddy grabbed them by the arm, and before Izuku could process anything, they were on the porch and suddenly they were aware of the biting cold, their backpack lying at their feet. Izuku waited for half an hour before accepting that their parents weren't going to let them in. They thought that this was the end of everything as they knew it. They were right. 11 years later, looking up at the gates of UA, Izuku considered getting kicked out the best thing that ever happened to them. Running from muggers through the streets of Musutafu was not exactly the way Izuku planned on spending their day, but fate seemed determined to screw them over. Wouldn't be the first time. How did a simple dumpster dive end up like this? Oh right, the three buffoons chasing them had decided that mugging Kyubo-sen would be a good idea. Seriously. What kind of jackass do you have to be to rob an elderly woman who spent her days volunteering at the local soup kitchen? And of course Izuku couldn't just keep their head down. No, they had to jump in and try to stop them. I guess old habits die hard, they thought as they ran down filth alleyways, jumping on dumpsters and climbing rusted-out fire escapes that creaked ominously with every step, following escape routes memorized long ago. The thugs, however, could not keep up. They must be new, Izuku mused to themselves, as they lost their pursuers within 5 minutes. They sighed as they headed through memory-filled alleyways, amusing themselves by imagining how annoyed those thugs must be that a 9-year-old had outrun them. Eventually, they reached an abandoned warehouse that, on the outside at least, looked abandoned, rusted roofing, worn-down walls. In fact, the only sign that the place had ever been functioning was a half-torn sign that designated the place as storage for a long-since bankrupt mechanics company. Opening the door, they walked into what had been their home for the past 5 years. They stashed whatever scavenged supplies that had survived the trip into cupboards that were probably about to fall apart. They didn't change out of the grimy clothes, too mentally exhausted to even bother. They ate some stale bread that was about to go bad, carefully tearing out the moldy bits and some of the canned tuna they'd managed to snag from the local grocery store, wrinkling their nose at the smell. It was probably fine. They dug around in their backpack. A bright yellow thing with more stitching and tears than intact fabric. Was it obvious and recognizable and not at all great for sneaking around? Yeah, they'd gotten caught stealing on multiple occasions because the thing attracted attention. That doesn't mean they're going to get rid of it though. After all, 𝗀𝐻 had gotten it for them back when Izuku was still her child. Maybe they're sentimental for wanting to remember the times before their diagnosis. But it was the one thing about their old life they couldn't part with. Shaking themselves out of their thoughts, Izuku fished out a worn notebook labeled Analysis No. 8 in neat handwriting. The books used to be called Hero Analysis for the Future, but they'd long since lost hope for that dream to ever come true. Deep down they still held on. Izuku flopped down on the nest of moth-eaten blankets and raggedy pillows they called a bed, clicked their pen, and started writing up an analysis on a new hero that debuted last week. A lady with a mutation quirk that gave her the traits of a rabbit. She called herself Maruko. Izuku sat there, writing away in the kind of half-aware state that comes from extreme focus. Before they knew it, it was getting dark outside. Izuku flopped down on the blankets, contemplating not going out tonight since they were already sore from the chase that afternoon. Eventually, the allure of the fresh night air was too much to resist. Izuku quickly threw on a dark green hoodie that covered their iconic curly hair and a black face mask to hide their freckles, pocketing some pepper spray and a butterfly knife they had stole permanently borrowed from a mugger. Finally, they grabbed their staff and set off into the night. Running across the rooftops of Musutafu was exhilarating. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 had initially started free running to distract from the nightmares they knew would greet them if they slept, to get rid of excess energy from the day. And besides, it was good practice for running from bullies, their legs pounding on the concrete of the roofs while their steps were almost silent. The only thing that could make people notice them was their bright red Quirkless shoes. They had never liked those shoes. But it's not like there were other options. No, the brand that made the specialty shoes that Quirkless people needed due to their extra pinky joint specifically made the shoes as noticeable as possible, so that everyone knew when they saw a Quirkless person, knew when they saw someone lesser. Of course, thanks to the low population of Quirkless nowadays, there were a lot of people who actually didn't recognize the shoes. Most of the ones that did were either Quirkless themselves or knew a Quirkless person. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 was sure that they could probably make themselves a different colored pair of shoes, but they didn't have the materials, nor the skills to do so. A scream for help jolted 𝐬𝐻𝐻 out of their musings. Running to where they'd heard it, they saw a small woman being cornered by two thugs. "Listen here, lady, no one's gonna come save you. Not in this part of town. Just give us the money and no one gets hurt." 𝐬𝐻𝐻 quickly took stock of the quirks at play. Okay, the first guy's got horns of some kind, plus hooves, likely some kind of bull mutation, likely coupled with enhanced strength, maybe poor eyesight as well. Oh yeah, he's squinting. I can work with that. Second guy doesn't have any obvious mutations, so I should be more careful since I don't know what his core. Oh, never mind, his nails just turned into needles. Okay, so stay out of grabbing range for the needle guy and see if I can trick the bull guy into running into a wall or something. With that plan solidly set, 𝐬𝐻𝐻 jumped down in front of the lady, using their staff to block a hit from the needle guy. "Ma'am, you should probably run," they said as they started dodging the two thugs. They couldn't rely on one hit knocking either of the guys out. They might be fast and stealthy, but their offense is certainly something they don't get opportunities to practice. Besides, Quirkless people shouldn't be able to fight back. They were weak. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 was weak. Eventually, the needle guy got a bit too close for comfort, and 𝐬𝐻𝐻 reflexively swung with their staff, hitting the guy right in the groin. He screamed and writhed on the ground. Quickly knocking him out, 𝐬𝐻𝐻 then focused on the bull guy. As suspected, he'd been having a lot of trouble hitting them due to poor eyesight. So 𝐬𝐻𝐻 decided to play Matador and lead the guy around until he got really mad and charged. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 dodged just before impact, and the bull guy crashed right into the wall, causing him to fall backwards, unconscious. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 pulled a bunch of zip ties from their pocket and tied the two unconscious thugs to the handle of a nearby dumpster, wrote their sticky note, explaining what exactly happened before scurrying up the fire escape and disappearing before the cops actually showed up. Honestly, becoming a vigilante was an accident. Really, it sounds ridiculous, but they genuinely didn't realize what they were doing until they saw a newspaper calling them one. They just wanted to do some free running. It just so happened that people tend to commit crimes at night. And 𝐬𝐻𝐻 being 𝐬𝐻𝐻, they intervened every time they saw or heard a crime being committed. They just hoped no one sent any heroes after them. Wraith is what they were called. Several cops and civilians making reference to their tendency to disappear into the night like a ghost. Their only identifiers were a green hoodie, red shoes, and a metal staff strapped to their back. Always neat and tidy in their takedowns, and often the only sign that they'd been there being a small sticky note attached to the tied-up criminals listing what their crimes were. Of course, this was none of 𝐲𝐻𝐻's business, or at least it wasn't until 𝐲𝐶 contacted him about finding the vigilante and bringing them in. Truth be told, 𝐲𝐻𝐻 didn't have a major issue with vigilantes, unlike most Limelight heroes. As long as they were decent human beings genuinely out to help people, 𝐲𝐻𝐻 left them alone or even worked with them occasionally. So really, he didn't know why it was him specifically that the detective had requested. But oh well, there was nothing he could do about it. Of course, actually finding them was the tough part, between juggling regular hero work, his new job at 𝑢, and not to mention the general energy that was required to be in the same social group as 𝐴𝐻𝐻 and Hisashi. The underground hero barely had time to look over the case and its very limited information. So if 𝐲𝐻𝐻 started drinking more coffee, staying up later, and generally being grumpier than normal, well, only his husband needed to know. Morning Shu, speak of the devil, Yamada Hisashi, otherwise known as Present Mike, danced into the kitchen where 𝐲𝐻𝐻 was drinking coffee straight from the pot and started making breakfast, humming to himself all the while seriously. How does he have so much energy? It's 6 in the morning. Morning Zashi, he replied tiredly. Hey, what's with the extra grumpy face? Now, don't get him wrong, 𝐲𝐻𝐻 loved his husband, but every once in a while he just wants Hisashi to shut the fuck up. 𝐲𝐻𝐻 sighed, knowing he'd have to give an answer at some point. It's nothing, sunshine. There's just this new vigilante on the streets and Tsukachi wants me to investigate. Oh, well, what you got so far? Hisashi was looking over 𝐲𝐻𝐻's shoulder at the file in his hand. The file in question was Wraith's latest arrest. 2 drug dealers who claimed that they were just doing a regular deal when a little demon thing appeared out of nowhere and knocked them both out. So little information meant that anything useful would have to be found by 𝐲𝐻𝐻 himself, and the patterns of arrests showed that either Wraith had a lot of patrol routes and regularly switched them up, or they had no set patrol route. 𝐜𝐴 was really hoping it was the first option because tracking down someone who had no definable pattern was always hell. They have red shoes. And that's it. That's all anyone knows for certain. Anything else? Age, quirk, fighting style? Nothing. 𝐜𝐴 waved the file at Hisashi as if it would magically give him more answers. Unfortunately, it was uncooperative. Oh, Hisashi, read through the file as well. No wonder they want you on this case. They need someone to track 𝐴 down, yeah. But between this and teaching, 𝐜𝐴 shook his head. How the hell do you manage 3 jobs? He asked enviously. Seriously, you've been juggling hero work, your show, and teaching for a whole year now. Instead of offering any answers, Hisashi just laughed. You know me, dear. I never could just relax. Now hurry up and get your hero costume. We're gonna be late to work. I want to actually introduce you to the other staff this time. It's been a week and you haven't even tried talking to them. 𝐜𝐴 scowled at the thought. He really didn't need to know the staff. There was a reason he is in the vents the entire week instead of staying in the teacher's lounge. The other teachers, whoever they were, are loud. The only teacher he interacted with regularly was 𝐾𝐻, since they're the homeroom teachers for the 2 heroics courses. The other undergrounder was enough of a nuisance during patrol, and it seemed their rivalry had bled over into their teaching. Hisashi apparently was not going to wait for 𝐜𝐴 to finish his coffee and dragged him out to the car. Come on, you can review the case later. Last time I was late, Nezu threatened to give me everyone else's paperwork for a week. 𝐜𝐴 huffed in amusement at that. Of course the rat Satan would do something like that. And Hisashi was right. He could figure out more of the case on patrol tonight. It's not like 𝐴 would just show up and introduce themselves after all, right? Izuku sighed as they used a napkin to scrub at their desk. The hateful words and slurs scrawled across it felt like needles turning their heart into a pin cushion. Their classmates quietly giggled in the background, some gathering up the courage to make snide comments at them. Bakugo seemed to be especially angry. For some reason, Izuku wasn't sure. They hadn't done anything to piss him off lately, had they? Oh well, they'd find out during lunch at least. Maybe there was a new rule they hadn't learned. The rules were never told to them, at least not directly. The first one they learned was when they were 5. It was the easiest. No muttering. After the 5th time Izuku had gotten slapped for their creepy muttering, it wasn't creepy, they'd learned their lesson. The second was learned when they were 7. Never get a test score above 70. This one took a bit more experiment. After Izuku got reprimanded for cheating, they didn't cheat, they tried to avoid cheating again. The teacher again told them they were cheating when they got 97 on their next test. There's no way a thing like you could get marked like this without cheating. That's what Maki-sensei said the 3rd time it happened. And Izuku believed her. After all, if she was wrong, someone would have said something, right? After that, they made sure to mark answers wrong, just enough to pass, and certainly never above a 70. The 3rd and 4th rules were learned together. Always let them hit you, and never spread rumors. It was when they had gotten a cold and been really sick. Because of that, Izuku's brain-to-mouth filter had disappeared. Bakugo had tried to blast them, but they had dodged out of the way. And when the teacher asked what happened, Izuku told the truth, lied, and said that Bakugo had attacked them. Later that day, Bakugo and his friends cornered Izuku outside of school and gave them a beating that was 10 times worse than they had ever gotten. After that, Izuku always let people hit them, or it would be worse later. Of course, Izuku had made sure to follow those rules to a T, so why was Bakugo so mad at them? They mused as they walked towards the cafeteria, making sure to trip over the outstretched leg that one of the other students had shoved in their path. Rule 3. Izuku went through the familiar routine of getting their food, making sure the food didn't get fall onto the floor, and then sneaking their way to the rooftop where nobody would bother them. It was their moment of peace. A moment where Izuku could let themselves believe that they were just a normal kid, and everything was okay. But today, that moment of peace was interrupted. Worthless. That's all you'll ever be. The unsolicited thought creeped through Izuku's head like venom. Maybe you should just, no. Nope, not in a million years. Izuku might believe that they are weak, and they might have almost given up on being a hero, but they still valued their life, right? Then again, people who run around at night being a vigilante probably aren't the picture of mental health. The warning bell rang as Izuku was startled out of their musings by the terror of being late. Last time that had happened, Maki-sensei had tried to call 𝐴. She almost managed it as well, but Izuku somehow managed to convince her that 𝐴 was at work and shouldn't be bothered with a useless Deku. Izuku didn't know what their parents would do if they ever had to deal with them again, but they knew it wasn't good. And they knew 𝐴 hadn't said a word to the Bakugos either, considering that the explosive blonde had never used it to mock them. Even from outside of the classroom door, Izuku could hear the snickers of their classmates. They took a deep breath before opening the door, knowing what was awaiting them. As they stepped in, their eyes slowly trailed to their desk. A bouquet of spider lilies sat there, taunting them, telling them that they shouldn't exist. Izuku simply picked it up and threw it out of the window. Class was boring as usual. Izuku didn't exactly know why. Perhaps it was because they were too stupid to understand the materials. They'd memorized the entire textbook by now. Maki-sensei droned on and on about physics. It seemed like even she didn't want to be here, and she kept sending thinly veiled glares at Izuku throughout the lesson, even stifling a laugh when Mizukami used his quirk to throw water at their notebook, leaving them to try and salvage the notes they'd taken. Of course, everyone laughed at the quirkless kid, Izuku thought bitterly before snapping themselves out of their thoughts, wondering how on earth they had gotten it into their head that they could think so disrespectfully about their classmates. They were right to feel bitter after everything that's been done to them. As the bell rang, Izuku immediately ran out of the classroom. The sounds of explosions quickly followed by a yell of Deku. As Bakugo chased them down the hallway, Izuku knew that he'd catch up, that they would let him catch them get caught. If he didn't, Izuku would get beaten black and blue the next day. So they stood there as he let off explosion after explosion, burning clothes and skin and hair. Izuku knew those would scar later. They had so many across their shoulders and back, as well as a few on their chest. Starburst, line and patch-shaped scars covered their body from various classmates and sometimes teachers, whether caused by quirks or sharp pieces of wire and other improvised weapons. The blooming pain across their back was nothing new. In fact, Izuku barely even felt it. Thank goodness for their high pain tolerance. However, their lack of reaction seemed to infuriate Bakugo. Oi Deku, aren't you gonna cry? Are you trying to act tough? Huh, you think you're better than me? He yelled as he continued beating Izuku. There was more yelling, but Izuku couldn't hear, their thoughts spiraling as the outside world became duller. At some point, Bakugo had seemingly gotten bored and left. Izuku didn't know when or how long afterwards that they had just laid on the ground, staring up at nothing. They're pretty sure some other classmates kicked them sometime. They didn't move for a while, until some stray cats started sniffing at them, perhaps to see if they were edible. Perhaps mercifully they didn't find any trouble on the way back, limping back to their warehouse, ignoring the odd looks they got from strangers on the street. Izuku supposed no one in their right mind would try and mug the kid who's clearly been beaten up already. Nothing of value there. Their backpack had a new hole in it that they'd have to patch up when they got to the warehouse. And their uniform were burned in a lot of places. Luckily, they weren't completely noticeable. Bakugo's quirk still not being strong enough to fully burn a hole into the cloth. Only on closer inspection would one find tiny pockmarked holes over patches of burned skin. Izuku shuddered to think of the damage he would be able to do if he continued to grow stronger, maybe even as much as a real bomb. If he blew someone up, would there be bleeding everywhere or would they just be cooked meat? Actually, there wouldn't be any blood. The wounds would be cauterized. If he trained enough, maybe he could use his explosions to make himself faster if he just aimed behind him. If he aimed down, would he be able to fly? They continued analyzing the possibilities of Bakugo's quirk. It's not that difficult, of course. The upside of being forced to interact with him and his quirk on a daily basis, they supposed. In fact, they had done this analysis hundreds of times over. Some questions were still unanswered, like the flight one, but it was a good way to occupy their thoughts while their brain was on autopilot as they followed the familiar alleyways back to their warehouse. Once inside, Izuku went over to the cabinet where they kept the medical supplies. It was mostly burn cream, of course, and a small box with a singly roll of bandages and a needle. Luckily, they hadn't had to stitch up any wounds lately since their last bit of suture had run out months ago, and they hadn't had the opportunity to steal more. Quickly tending to their wounds, Izuku sighed as they weighed the idea of skipping patrol that night. On the one hand, not going out meant that Izuku would have to deal with the nightmares, sleep more than 2 hours, or lose their mind of boredom. On the other hand, they didn't want to risk getting themselves killed because they couldn't run properly. In the end, the option of not risking death won out, so Izuku changed out of uniform and into something cozier, torn sweatpants and a t-shirt that had the word pajamas written across the front. Finally flopping down in the blanket nest, Izuku mentally prepared for the terrors that awaited them. Drowning. It feels like they're drowning. The words flooding their lungs. Every breath feels like a damnation of their own life. Every insult they've ever heard. Every time someone calls them worthless. Every burn and bruise and broken bone. And suddenly they're back on their parents' porch, outside a house that was never their home. Inside they heard laughter. They want to turn and run, but their body puppets itself to the window. They watch as their parents smile and laugh and dance, talking about how much happier they are now that the thing that pretended to be their child is gone. Then they're on the roof of their school, being held over the edge by a grinning Bakugo. You know, it would be so much better for everyone if you died. He stares at them, ruby eyes meeting emerald. They're in the classroom, surrounded by teachers and students as they get beaten up. They can feel their consciousness slipping as they cry and scream and beg for help. Everyone looks at them like a spectacle, like a show, like their death meant nothing more than momentary entertainment. As darkness took over their consciousness, the last thing they see is the joyful faces of everyone they used to call family, smiling as they are finally free of the shackle that is Izuku. Izuku woke up gasping, clawing at their chest, trying to get the horrible words out of their lungs, tears rolling down their face, sobbing harshly as they struggled to get any air outside of shuddering, shallow breaths. They sat there for a long while gathering themselves as sobs racked their chest. Maybe tomorrow would be a better day. Izuku chuckled to himself. No, tomorrow wouldn't be better. There hasn't been a single better day since they were diagnosed. Izuku was definitely being followed. This wasn't a gut feeling or anything. This was the fact that several patrols now had been accented by someone watching them, definitely not getting close enough to be noticed by most people. But Izuku wasn't most people. Izuku was used to bullies who try to follow them through crowds and teachers who watch their every move, not to mention living where they did meant learning to avoid muggers and rapists. The point is that Izuku knows when they're being watched. The question now was, who? It was most likely a professional given how silently they moved, villain or hero. Either way, whoever it was definitely wanted to catch them. A lot of local gangs wanted them dead, and if it was a pro hero, being caught meant getting arrested. And getting arrested either meant getting put back in foster care or being returned to their parents. Honestly, Izuku would prefer the villains. Whatever that said about their mental state, they really didn't want to know. They had a plan. It wasn't a great one, but they had it. They were going to talk to the person that they had dubbed Shadow, a bit on the nose, but it would do until they learnt the person's name, or as much of a name as they could get. Izuku wasn't delusional enough to think they would get their Shadow's real name. Tonight was the night where they would let their Shadow get close enough to question them. Not too close, of course. Hopefully they would be able to keep at least a 2-meter distance. They'd spent the last few days trying to find a way to learn how to approach their Shadow, tracking their Shadow's every movement and constantly giving them the slip. Honestly, they might have just been getting a little impatient about the whole thing. It was clear that their Shadow didn't know where they lived, or they would have been visited at the warehouse by now. Not to mention the Shadow didn't ever get close enough to get any details of their appearance, unless they had some kind of sight enhancement or perception quirk. So Izuku felt rather safe about the fact that they would be able to maintain some level of anonymity in their meeting. Of course, they'd need to find out who their Shadow was first. It would be idiotic to go into this plan without knowing their Shadow's capabilities. At this point, Shadow was wondering if he just had bad luck. It had been a full hour into his patrol and he still hadn't caught a glimpse of Wraith. The Vigilante was certainly slippery. He hadn't even managed to get close in the last few patrols. Either Wraith was just normal, that stealthy, or Wraith already knew that he was tailing them. Either way, Wraith was skilled. Shadow certainly wasn't going to underestimate his opponent, especially when considering that he had no idea what quirk they had. Shadow had originally thought it was some kind of enhancer or stealth quirk given how quickly the Vigilante disappeared across rooftops. Shadow could just try and use Erasure on Wraith to see what happened, but he wasn't quite sure if he had been discovered, and he would rather not give himself away if he wasn't. Speaking of the Vigilante, Shadow paused as he noticed a particular person on one of the nearby rooftops, the now extremely familiar green hoodie and red shoes giving them away as Wraith. Shadow stopped just short of the rooftop, waiting for Wraith to make a move. A full week of tracking the Vigilante showed that they were almost never still, always in motion unless they were catching their breath. He would, however, take this opportunity to try and observe Wraith, to see if he could identify any kind of behaviors that would indicate personality. Contrary to most of the rumors that have rapidly spread around the US student body, Shadow was actually incredibly perceptive when it comes to people's emotions and behaviors. Not that he'd ever used that to socialize. Being good at recognizing people's emotions and being an extrovert were distinctly separate things. Wraith was scribbling away in what looked like a notebook. Shadow offhandedly wondered what the contents were. There was something written on the cover, but Shadow couldn't see anything except the number 8. Whatever the contents were, they were filling the pages with incredible speed. It seemed like the Vigilante was fully engrossed in their writing. A perfect time to observe the Vigilante in an unguarded state. Of course, now was the time when something happened. That something being a very high-pitched scream that was somehow louder than his ashes emanating from the alleyways. And suddenly a blur of movement a few meters ahead of him, running towards the noise. Shadow quickly followed, focused on not letting Wraith notice him, but also fully prepared to help if needed. He was still a hero after all. He saw Wraith stop near a building, so he stopped a few meters behind them, and Wraith was waiting for something. After about 2 minutes, Shadow was about to go down there himself, half wondering why Wraith hadn't tried to intervene yet. When they slowly started to descend with a remarkable quiet and stealth that spoke to years of practice, he idly pondered how long they had trained before going full Vigilante. Shadow rushed to the edge of the building and looked down, expecting to see a fight, but then quickly realized why Wraith had waited. In the middle of the alleyway was a sickly-looking man, being held hostage by a lady wearing elegant clothes that certainly had no place in this side of town. She was holding a glowing hand to the man's neck, probably her quirk ready to fire. Meanwhile, Wraith was sneaking around the back, out of the woman's sight. Shadow had a bad feeling about this. He got ready to activate his quirk the second that the woman tried anything. Izuku was writing up an analysis of the latest villain when they felt it, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. As much as they would love to just turn around and call their Shadow out, people tended to get aggressive when caught by their target, and besides, let their shadow think that they had the upper hand. It gave 𝐬𝐸 a better chance to figure out exactly who they were dealing with. When they heard the screams, they bolted towards the noise, surveying the situation. The lady looked to be mugging the man. They decided to sneak down, wait for the man to start emptying his pockets to get the woman away from him before they could do anything. Of course, nothing ever went as planned for them since the universe seemed to hate them. So when, the second that the lady took her focus away from the man, 𝐬𝐸 attacked, she immediately turned around and blindly fired her quirk at them. Some kind of energy. They quickly dodged the first blast, having expected that. What they didn't expect was the man trying to punch them. What the hell? I just saved you, 𝐬𝐸 thought indignantly as the man continued attacking them. This combined with the woman's energy beams, 𝐬𝐸 was finding it difficult to get a hit in. It didn't help that they were also trying to prevent the man and woman from killing each other. It seemed that the man's quirk was an enhancer. Suddenly the woman's hands stopped glowing and she looked startled, looking at her hands like they were broken. Did she hit her quirk limit? 𝐬𝐸 couldn't ponder more as they still had the man to deal with, so they used their staff to knock the man out, while the woman was incapacitated by something. Was that their shadow? Turning around, they caught a figure wearing all black, using a gray scarf-like thing to tie up the woman. Wait a damn second. 𝐬𝐸's eyes darted to the top of the figure's face where a pair of yellow goggles covering the eyes confirmed 𝐬𝐸's suspicions. Holy shit, that's 𝐬𝐸. 𝐬𝐸 needed to leave now. 𝐬𝐸 was one of the best underground heroes in Musutafu. 𝐬𝐸 heard about him through whispers in the underground, and 𝐬𝐸 would be lying if they said 𝐬𝐸 wasn't one of their favorite heroes. All Might was still #1, but 𝐬𝐸 was just so cool and he helped people that Limelight heroes forgot about. And he would probably be able to catch 𝐬𝐸 in a heartbeat if he wanted, so 𝐬𝐸 needed to stop geeking out and run. 𝐲𝐸 had just finished tying up the lady when he turned around and saw 𝐴𝐻 running away like a bat out of hell. He would have gone after them, but the two unconscious people prevented him from doing so. Well, if 𝐴𝐻 didn't know they were being followed earlier. They certainly know now. 𝐲𝐸 suppressed the urge to groan in annoyance, realizing that this would make things infinitely more difficult for the investigation. He sighed and pulled out his phone. Hello, 𝐴𝐻. Please tell me you have an update on the 𝐴𝐻 case. Detective Tsukachi's voice was heard through the alleyway. Well, about that. Running through the streets of Musutafu, 𝐬𝐸 followed the sounds of fighting towards an area that was generally considered a drug dealer's haven. Great, just what I need. Another deal gone wrong. Let's just hope 𝐬𝐸 doesn't show up on this one. It had been a few days since they had figured out their shadow's identity. Since then, 𝐬𝐸 had given up on being unseen. Now 𝐬𝐸 had to be the one hiding, because there was no way to be able to outrun an actual hero. Still, they just couldn't stop being 𝐴𝐻. People needed them. When they were 𝐴𝐻, they weren't useless. They weren't Deku. 𝐬𝐸 jumped across the roofs, reaching the fight quickly. It looked like the two sides were evenly matched. This must have been between two gangs, twice the enemies. 𝐬𝐸 sighed, and then winced when the action aggravated their bruised ribs. 𝗵𝑄go had certainly not gone easy on them today. Perhaps they shouldn't have gotten in his way again, but they couldn't just stand there. 𝐬𝐸 was having lunch on the roof when they saw 𝗵𝑄go and his lackeys cornering one of the other students, a young boy with fly mutations. 𝐬𝐸 couldn't quite remember his name. If they were anyone else, they might have just sat there with their lunch and ignored it, but they were 𝐬𝐸. They used the nearby tree to climb down, running towards the group as 𝗵𝑄go fired explosion after explosion in the fly kid's face. Stop, 𝐬𝐸 signed, getting in between 𝗵𝑄go and his victim, an explosion hitting his side. 𝗬𝐸 had learned JSL a long time ago, at first because 𝗵𝑄go's quirk was damaging his hearing, and they wanted to be able to talk to him despite that. About a year after their diagnosis, however, they had learned it for a completely different reason. Sometimes when they tried to talk, especially to strangers, they just couldn't. It was like their throat just closed up, so they used JSL as a way to communicate without having to speak. Get out of the way, Deku, or else. 𝗵𝑄go sneered at the miniature explosions crackling in his palms and the burnt caramel smell from the nitroglycerin filling the air. 𝐬𝐸 stood their ground. Meanwhile, the other kids backed off, knowing that 𝗵𝑄go didn't take kindly to anyone stealing his victims. 𝐬𝐸 shook themselves out of their thoughts and leapt down, ignoring the various aches from their body. Several heads turned their way, temporarily pausing the fight. Well, what do we have here? One of them snickered a little. Vigilante. 𝐬𝐸 tried to be indignant at being called little, but they were 9 and shorter than most 9-year-olds at that, so the comment was kind of justified. 𝐬𝐸 brandished their staff as they got ready for a fight. The leader seemed to have minor feline mutations, most notably his ears and legs. 𝐬𝐸 waited for him to make the first move. They couldn't risk getting caught off guard if the leader had some hidden aspect to his quirk. The leader threw a quick left hook. 𝐬𝐸 dodged by scrambling backwards, so he has enhanced speed. Or at least, insanely quick reflexes, 𝐬𝐸 thought as they dodged the hit. Striking back with their staff, the leader blocked it. The two continued to trade blows until the leader managed to land a hit. 𝐬𝐸 hissed in pain as the leader's fist struck their arm, right where 𝗵𝑄go had bruised them. 𝐬𝐡𝐚𝐭 swung back, the staff whacking the leader on the head, dazing him. Unfortunately, the other thugs seemed to finally register 𝐬𝐡𝐚𝐭 as a threat and surrounded them. 𝐬𝐡𝐚𝐭 got into a defensive stance as they realized that they might have gotten in over their head. 𝐲𝐻 was simply on patrol when he saw 𝗲𝗏 fighting off a bunch of thugs. He immediately jumped down to help them. Hopefully this time they wouldn't run away. 𝐲𝐻 hasn't managed to get anywhere near 𝗲𝗏 since that fight a few days ago. It seemed that 𝗲𝗏 was now actively avoiding him. This could be a chance to capture them, or at least talk. He quickly captured 2 of the thugs. They had been caught off guard by his arrival, then looked to see if 𝗲𝗏 needed any help, but they seemed to be doing all right, so he focused on the other 3. One seemed to have a mutation quirk that gave them 6 eyes, and the other 2 didn't have any visible quirks. 𝐲𝐻 quickly apprehended the extra-eyed man. Meanwhile, it seemed that 𝗲𝗏 had knocked out the leader and was fighting the last 2 criminals, knocking them out in quick succession as it seemed that neither of them had any combat training and were unarmed. 𝗲𝗏 turned to him and quickly turned to run. 𝐲𝐻 needed to do something, or he'd lose this chance. Hey, wait. 𝐬𝐡𝐚𝐭 temporarily froze in their tracks. Momentarily weighing their options, they turned around to face the underground hero. They tried to ask what the hero wanted, but they also didn't want him to figure out that they were a child. 𝐬𝐡𝐚𝐭 thought back to the plan they had made. Yes, they had wanted to meet their shadow, but that was before they realized that their shadow was one of the most fearsome underground heroes in Musutafu. Plus, that was on their terms, not in the middle of a random battle. They realized that Eraserhead was looking at them expectantly, so, stealing their nerves, they made their choice. 𝐲𝐻 watched 𝗲𝗏 freeze at the sound of his voice and slowly turn around. Okay, this seems good. They're not running away. Now what? 𝐲𝐻 thought to himself as the vigilante stood there for several seconds before tying their staff back onto their back and signing a question. What do you want? 𝐲𝐻 was surprised for a second, and then silently thanked the fact that he was fluent in JSL thanks to his 𝐴𝐻𝐸. Just wanted to ask some questions, he said casually. Better to gain the vigilante's trust. It was unlikely they would allow themselves to get arrested if they didn't trust him. Plus, no vigilante becomes what they are without a damn good reason. After all, most people who want to save people become heroes, so the people who become vigilantes usually become that way because they have a vendetta or because they couldn't become a hero for some reason. Right, because that's why you've been following me for the past 2 weeks. 𝗲𝗏 was completely tensed and clearly ready to run. Not that 𝐲𝐻 wouldn't be the same way in their situation. After all, they were a vigilante. They had no reason to trust a hero. 𝐲𝐻 wished that he could see their face, but they had a mask on that covered the lower half. Plus their hoodie covered the upper half in shadow, so it was almost impossible to see their face, let alone get any tells for their emotions. 2 weeks? You've known the whole time. 𝐲𝐻 was impressed. 𝗲𝗏 must be extremely well trained to detect someone as skilled as 𝐲𝐻. 𝗲𝗏 nodded. I was trying to figure out who you are. Didn't expect my shadow to be you. 𝐲𝐻 tilted his head. All right, well, that's impressive. How many years have you been training? Not a lot of people can notice me when I'm trailing them. How long have you been training for? 𝐲𝐻 was hoping to get an answer. Then he might be able to get an approximate age for the vigilante. 𝐬𝐡𝐚𝐭 was panicking mildly. Eraserhead was clearly trying to fish for information, so 𝐬𝐡𝐚𝐭 decided to be vague about it, just to throw him off the trail a bit. A few years now, technically it was the truth, if you thought about it. They'd been training ever since they were kicked out. Running from bullies, stealing to survive, all of these could probably be seen as training, from a certain point of view. Eraserhead looked like he wanted to say something else when 𝐬𝐡𝐚𝐭 heard police sirens in the distance. The second that Eraserhead turned to face the entrance to the alleyway, they used the opportunity to once again make a swift getaway, climbing up onto the roofs and then almost immediately dipping down into another alleyway to avoid being detected. 𝐲𝐻 turned back towards the alleyway and saw that 𝗲𝗏 was once again gone. He muttered several curses that would make 𝗏𝗟 proud as he tried to identify which direction the vigilante had gone in. The police cars pulled into the alleyway and Detective 𝗀𝗏 walked up to him. Hey Eraser, what's going on? The detective asked, already taking notes on the scene as several police officers started arresting the criminals. Drug deal gone wrong. 𝗲𝗏 was already here by the time I stumbled across the fight, managed to get them to answer some vague question. But they ran as soon as they heard your sirens, 𝗀𝗏 explained. Well, you can tell me the rest back at the station since I still need a detailed statement from you, 𝗀𝗏. This was gonna be a long night. The gates to Alder Elementary loomed overhead as 𝐬𝐡𝐚𝐭 felt an overall sense of dread for the day. Well, they always felt a sense of dread when school was concerned, but today felt like it was going to be extra awful. The rules of the school running through their mind as they stepped through the gates, feeling like they were stepping towards their own death, tripping on the outstretched legs, keeping their head down and somehow managing to make their way through the first part of the day without drawing attention to themselves. They had sat down to their maths lesson when things started going wrong for them. They had dutifully scrubbed out the hateful words on their desk, disposed of the spider lilies sitting on their desk, But then they got careless. The topic of discussion from the two students next to Izuku turned towards the latest hero fight, and Izuku, despite themselves, had begun muttering without realizing it. They got yelled at by the teacher for disrupting class with their muttering, ignored the jibes and giggles thrown their way as the teacher continued teaching, and throwing glares and grimaces at Izuku. They felt so stupid. They were doing so well. Why did they mumble? Why did they break the first rule? Couldn't they have just kept their mouth shut? Izuku sat glumly at their rooftop hideout as they watched the other kids play heroes or show off their quirks. They really needed to stop being such a nuisance in class. The other students needed to be focused. And how could they be focused when Izuku was sitting there muttering like the creepy, useless Deku that they were? Izuku was so lost in thought that they almost didn't hear the school bell and had to scramble to class. In that scramble, they ran into one of the other students, specifically one of the upperclassmen. Iwai-san, a student with a major mean streak, as she would use her quirk on anyone that she deemed weaker, which was a problem because her quirk let her grow stone spikes from her skin, and those spikes were very sharp. Izuku froze as she turned towards them, anger and disgust clear on her face. They had only been put in their place by her a few times, and all of those times they had broken bones at worst and deep gashes at best. Izuku just hoped she'd go easy on them today, but it seemed that luck was not on their side. Well, look what we have here, Iwai-san sneered. Watch where you're going, Deku. A thing like you should be careful, or people might hurt you. Her voice was a mocking sweetness, knowing that she was the exact kind of person she was talking about. I'm sorry, Izuku tried to apologize. Even if they knew that it was futile, the least they could do was be polite. Sorry, is that all you can say? And with that stupid stutter too? Iwai-san laughed. That's all a Deku can do, huh? Well, you're good for one other thing, quirk practice. The skin on her hands suddenly split and hardened, spikes growing out of the back of her hand in a way that made them effective as knives. She loomed over them menacingly, hands ready to mercilessly stab and slice into flesh, the stone spikes seemingly hungry for blood. And Izuku braced themselves for the feeling of tearing flesh and grinding bone that they knew would come once Iwai-san decided to stop playing with her food, like the cat stalking the mouse. And when she did, Izuku sat there and let it happen. And when she stabbed into their leg, they let it happen. It had been a few months since first meeting Wraith, and 𝐴𝐷 was slowly getting used to the Vigilante. The two would run into each other on patrol almost every night, usually when one of them has a fight that goes on long enough for the other to notice. 𝐴𝐷 had a file dedicated to the things he knew about the Vigilante, and although the file was still missing any identifying detail like age, as well as quirk, since they never used it, it wasn't an enhancer, unless it was a mutation, because 𝐴𝐷 had tried erasing Wraith's quirk while they were running from him and they didn't even react, so most likely it was a non-combative quirk. The information that 𝐴𝐷 did have was about Wraith's fighting style and behavioral patterns, like how they always focused on dodging and evasive maneuvers instead of offense. And in fact, the Vigilante's offensive capabilities were certainly underdeveloped. The one time that 𝐴𝐷 had seen Wraith throw a punch was when they had been backed into a corner, and it looked like the most amateurish punch he had ever seen. 𝐴𝐷 wondered exactly how they had trained their stealth and evasive abilities so well without even thinking to train their offensive abilities. The two of them had also communicated at certain points, with Wraith consistently using sign language. From those short conversations, 𝐴𝐷 had learned that Wraith was extremely good at reading people, usually able to identify sinister motives within criminals. Wraith only ever talked about the criminals in a very surface level. Despite that, in battle they exploited weaknesses that could only be known through a deep understanding of someone's quirk. Wraith was a complete contradiction, confident and friendly one moment, skittish and unsure the next. 𝐴𝐷 was starting to wonder if there was something more to that. But Wraith had successfully avoided every personal or personal adjacent question that 𝐴𝐷 has asked, so he stuck to helping out the Vigilante and hoping that he could gain their trust over time. That's when the Vigilante themselves landed on the roof next to them, but the sound was odd. Wraith was always near silent with their movements. It took all of 𝐴𝐷's situational awareness to hear them, but this time, 𝐴𝐷 heard the Vigilante very clearly. The hero turned to look at them, half surprised and half curious about the change in pattern, when he noticed something concerning. Wraith was clearly favoring one of their legs over the other. They were very good at hiding it, which was somehow even more concerning than the fact that they were hurt in the first place. Hey Eraser. Wraith seemed otherwise unharmed, even being their usual, slightly cautious but still somehow friendly self. But even 𝐴𝐷, who once fully ignored being stabbed in the shoulder to the point that his Ashi had to make him stay home under threat of hiding all the coffee, wouldn't go on patrol with an injury that hinders movement. That kind of recklessness is what got people killed. You're hurt, why are you on patrol? Izuku was absolutely not freaking out. They were going to be calm and they were going to talk their way out of this. They tried to act nonchalant. What are you talking about? Great, just great. That totally wasn't a dumb thing to say. They almost slapped themselves about how stupid that was. Eraser had definitely looked annoyed now. Then again, he always looked annoyed, so it was difficult to tell. But Izuku was sure he was more annoyed than before. "Wraith, you're favoring your left leg. You're clearly injured. You shouldn't be on patrol." Izuku tried to figure out what Eraserhead was thinking. But unlike most people, he was incredibly difficult to read. They supposed that was a skill that came from being an underground hero. "That's all right. I've patrolled with worse injuries." Izuku was trying to explain that everything was fine. They could handle this. They once patrolled with third-degree burns on their chest. It hurt like hell, but they survived, so what's the big deal? Eraserhead clearly thought it was concerning, however. "You've what? That could get you killed." If Izuku didn't know better, they'd think that the hero was concerned for them. But that was impossible. Why would anyone be concerned about a Deku like them? Eraserhead continued talking. "You should go home. It's dangerous for you to be out here with that injury. You could get killed. Get some rest." Izuku couldn't understand the hero's words. Why would he be worried about if Izuku got killed or not? Sure, he was a hero, and heroes are supposed to care, but no one needed to care about a quirkless Deku. And that's when it hit them. Eraserhead didn't know they were quirkless. He was treating them like a normal person. Of course he would be concerned. Izuku didn't quite know what to do with this information. If Eraserhead thought that they had a quirk, the way he was treating them made sense, but what would happen once he found out? Izuku didn't have to think too hard. The best case scenario was that he would ignore Izuku, leave them like their parents did. Worst case, he hurts them like the teachers at 𝗱. Izuku doubted that a hero would try and kill them, but that option was also on the table. Izuku knew that they couldn't let Eraserhead figure out that they were quirkless. That would only lead to trouble, and besides, the hero was concerned for them. No one was concerned for them, and the thought of that kind of care being directed at them made them feel warm and fuzzy inside. Izuku knew they were being selfish. They didn't deserve this kind of attention, but they couldn't help themselves. It was so nice to have someone care if they died or not. Someone who didn't actively want them to die. Maybe they could keep up this charade for a little while longer. "All right, I'll go home. See you tomorrow," Wraith signed. Then they turned and climbed down the fire escape. And while 𝗀𝗏 tried to follow to make sure that the Vigilante got home safe, Wraith's uncanny disappearing ability meant that they quickly escaped him. 𝗀𝗏 didn't quite know what to do. The Vigilante had mentioned that they had patrolled through worse injuries, and 𝗀𝗏 was just as worried about that as he was annoyed that Wraith didn't seem to take their own safety seriously. It reminded him of some of his students, and that feeling again, like he was missing something really important. Still, 𝗀𝗏 had a job to do, so he continued with his own patrol, determined to ask Wraith some questions next time he saw them. If Wraith was consistently getting hurt to that extent, there was most likely something sinister going on. The Vigilante was in danger somehow, and 𝗀𝗏 was a hero. He didn't ignore people in danger. Eraserhead was standing on the rooftop where Izuku had met with him yesterday. Their leg was much better now, still not completely healed, but no one had targeted it during school today, so it was actually able to heal semi-properly, especially since Eraserhead had sent them home the second he saw them limping. Izuku was still trying to process the idea that the hero actually cared about them, but it made some kind of sense after realizing that he thought they had a quirk. Still, Izuku had been mentally preparing for the other shoe to drop, and maybe they were a bit silly for thinking that Eraserhead would instantly know that they were quirkless, but they were used to everyone in their life knowing. And anyone that didn't was quickly told by others about that fact, warning them to stay away from the quirkless Deku, as if they were diseased, and Izuku supposed that, in a way, they were. After all, they had to have something wrong with them to be quirkless. So Izuku had spent most of the night figuring out how to keep their secret if Eraserhead ever asked about why they didn't use a quirk. They could just lie and say it was a minor quirk. After all, having an almost useless quirk was still better than being completely useless, and they could easily fake something like that, landing softly behind the hero, who noticed them the second they touched the concrete of the roof. Izuku walked up to him, noting exactly how the hero's gaze immediately went to their leg. "Don't worry, it's healed now," Izuku signed before starting to leave, eager to feel the cool night air. And to their surprise, Eraserhead was following them. Izuku stopped in their tracks and turned around instantly to face the hero, making a confused expression underneath their mask. Eraserhead simply tilted his head at them, sensing that they had a question. "Why are you following me?" The hero hadn't followed them around for a while now, mostly having stopped after their first conversation, so why was he following them now? Of course, the hero looked even more annoyed than normal today, if that was even possible. "You expect me to let you patrol on your own after being injured just yesterday? Honestly, unless you've got a healing quirk, a wound like that wouldn't heal completely in a day." Izuku was a bit caught off guard by the answer, not entirely expecting the concern that leaked through the tone of irritation. They seriously needed to quit being surprised if they were going to keep up this facade of a lie. Nonetheless, something in the hero's tone made them think twice of arguing, so they simply turned around and continued on their way with the patrol, ever mindful of the hero following them. The first hour of patrol was uneventful. The criminals must have decided to take a break for the night or something because it was eerily quiet, especially unexpected given the heightened activity lately. but nonetheless appreciated. However, as always, the peace never lasted. Eventually, the two began running into various crimes being committed. A robbery here, a drunk fight there. Generally, only one of them was required to solve the issue. However, it was simply more efficient to work in tandem. While it is very awkward at first, the two of them slowly gain an understanding of each other's fighting styles throughout the night. Of course, eventually something had to go wrong. Running along the rooftops, the two stumbled upon a civilian being beaten up in a back alley. Immediately, the both of them jumped into action, 𝐸𝐻 taking stock of the situation. 3 assailants. One seems to have a weak fire quirk. Very common but still dangerous. The other 2 are unknown quirks. The civilian seems to be bruised and a little burned but not too badly hurt. It seemed that they had gotten there just in time. Instantly, 2 of the assailants went down as both 𝐬𝐻 and Eraserhead leapt down into a surprise attack, leaving only the fire wielder left, who tried to scuffle backwards, clearly making for a retreat as they didn't seem to be willing to fight. Something in the back of 𝐬𝐻's mind roared in anger at the action. So you'll be glad to beat on someone weaker than you, but you'll run like a coward the second someone actually stands up to you. 𝐬𝐻 didn't quite know where that particular thought came from, or why they were so furious at the bully attacker. Either way, they punched the guy with much more force than they had intended, hard enough that it left the guy's nose bleeding. And then the man's fire licked at the edges of their hoodie. The scent of burning fiber suddenly turns to burning flesh as the dark alleyway fills with the sounds of popping and crackling that 𝐬𝐻 knew couldn't be there. And the man stood in front of them, his fire a red glow that reminded 𝐬𝐻 all too much of ruby red eyes. And suddenly the man was unconscious at their feet, and their knuckles felt wet, dripping with a dark red. 𝐸𝐻 knocked out the last assailant as 𝐲𝐻 handcuffed the others. 𝐲𝐻 was still a bit reluctant to let them patrol given the injury they had yesterday. But as far as 𝐲𝐻 could tell, their fighting in Parker was not hindered by whatever was left of their leg injury. He turned around to see 𝐸𝐻 standing over the fire wielder, blood dripping from the man's nose and their shaking hand, and pure rage radiating off of them like a sickly wave, drowning everything in that alley with cloying anger. 𝐸𝐻, the vigilante, seemed to snap out of whatever stupor they had been in and dragged the guy over to where the other 2 lay unconscious, roughly dropping him before swiftly making their escape to the rooftops. 𝐲𝐻 quickly followed, concerned about whatever just happened. He stopped as 𝐸𝐻 sat on the edge of the roof, looking down at the scene as blue and red lights flooded the alleyway. 𝐸𝐻, what happened there? 𝐲𝐻 asked, standing awkwardly a few feet away from the vigilante, not wanting to startle them, but also not wanting to leave them alone. I don't know. 𝐸𝐻 paused, hands shaking as they tried to collect themselves. He was running away. He hurt someone and couldn't even face the consequences. Each word was shakier and shakier as 𝐸𝐻 signed. You aren't just talking about that man, are you? 𝐲𝐻 asked, although the answer was fairly obvious. 𝐸𝐻 sighed and shook their head. I don't know. He just reminded me of a friend. 𝐲𝐻 had a sinking suspicion, remembering the injury 𝐸𝐻 had yesterday, and how they had acted as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Was that, friend, the reason you were hurt yesterday? 𝐲𝐻 was trying to be gentle, but he was sure it didn't sound right. Where was Hisashi when you needed him? He was always much better at this whole comfort thing than 𝐲𝐻 was. 𝐸𝐻 shook their head so rapidly that 𝐲𝐻 almost worried that the vigilante's head would fall off. No, that wasn't him. Not that time. 𝐸𝐻 quickly defended this friend, and 𝐲𝐻 really didn't like the picture that this was painting. But before he could ask any more questions about what the vigilante meant by not that time, 𝐸𝐻 continued hurriedly. Besides, I've never wanted to hurt him. I don't know why I got so angry at that other guy. Okay, well, why did he remind you of your friend? 𝐬𝐻 very carefully thought through their answer. If they said the wrong thing, Eraserhead could find out that they were quirkless. He always hurts people he thinks are weaker than him, but then pretends like it was the victim's fault when he gets confronted. In reality, 𝗵𝘃𝐻 was probably the worst bully in that school. While most just focus on Deku, 𝗵𝘃𝐻 and a few others like 𝐬𝐻 go after anyone weaker than themselves. So why call him your friend? He's targeting you as well, right? I mean, we used to be friends, and he could be harsh at times, but nothing I couldn't take. But then he started hurting other people, and we just drifted apart. What about you? What? 𝐬𝐻 was confused. You said you stopped being friends once he started hurting other people. Didn't you stop being friends once he started hurting you? 𝐬𝐻 froze. How were they supposed to explain to the hero that they didn't matter? If they did, the hero would find out they were quirkless. 𝐬𝐻 desperately tried to think of ways to get themselves out of this corner they had been backed into. Would running away be a good idea? Maybe. It was worth a shot at least. 𝐬𝐻 scrambled back to their feet and sprinted, mind running purely on adrenaline as instinct took them back to their warehouse. 𝐸𝐻 bolted away and 𝐲𝐻 sighed internally. Okay, that was clearly a sore topic. He should avoid that in the future, at least until 𝐸𝐻 trusted him enough to tell on their own. This was going to be tough. Maybe he could ask Hisashi for help. His husband always knew exactly what to say to get people to trust him. 𝐲𝐴 stared down at the cup of coffee in his hands. Wraith was avoiding him. They have been for 3 days. He had seriously messed up. Okay, maybe he shouldn't have pressed the issue when the vigilante was clearly stressed by it. But the past was the past, and 𝐻𝐡𝐚 had immediately called him an idiot when he had gotten home that day and told him what had happened. But his husband also gave him some advice on how to deal with Wraith, mostly involving giving the vigilante some space and basically assuming that he's starting from zero unless proven otherwise. On the other hand, 𝐻𝐡𝐚 was also very concerned about Wraith possibly being abused by a friend. Both of them were. 𝐻𝐡𝐚 suggested bringing it up, but not pushing it if Wraith didn't want to talk. Speaking of his husband, "Hey Moonlight," 𝐻𝐡𝐚 called out to him in a sing-song voice, leaving for patrol already? He asked, as if 𝐻𝐡𝐚 didn't have 𝐲𝐴's patrol times memorized to the minute. 𝐲𝐴 smiled softly. "Yeah, why?" He turned. 𝐻𝐡𝐚 looked concerned and a bit tired, which was unusual for him. The man was normally a bundle of energy even on the longest days. "Is something wrong, Sunshine?" 𝐻𝐡𝐚 laughed, although it was a forced one. "Is it that obvious?" He sighed. "Shoo, you've been worrying about Wraith constantly. If it were anyone else, 𝐲𝐴 would have denied being worried about anything. But 𝐻𝐡𝐚 was the one person he could never lie to. I'm the one who chased them off. I have to find them, especially if they're in danger, and we know they are." 𝐲𝐴 was beginning to ramble when he felt 𝐻𝐡𝐚 hug him tightly. "I'm sure they just want some space. Who knows, maybe tonight's the night they decide to show up again. Either way, you need to calm down. It's not doing anyone any good if you're running yourself ragged all patrol looking for a vigilante who has a reputation of not being found unless they want to be." 𝐲𝐴 could hear the concern in his husband's voice and felt more than a little guilty. Yeah, he had been doing way more hero work than normal. But was it really that obvious that he was just hoping to run into the vigilante? "All right, I'll stop looking for them, but I have to get going, so if you wouldn't mind letting go of me." 𝐻𝐡𝐚 complied, although not before giving him a quick kiss, and also making sure that 𝐲𝐴 took his dinner with him, because apparently jelly pouches didn't count as a real dinner according to 𝐻𝐡𝐚. 𝐻𝐡𝐚 sat in their warehouse bandaging up the injuries they'd gotten today. Thankfully it wasn't too bad, only a few second-degree burns and various cuts and bruises. Clearly the universe had decided to go easy on them today, or it was waiting for another opportunity to screw them over. They hadn't been patrolling for the last 3 days. Every time they thought about going, they remembered how they had hurt that man, and the conversation that had followed. Why did they run away? It had seemed like such a good idea at the time. Of course they had run. That was all a worthless Deku like them could do. They could fight. Of course not patrolling meant that they were sleeping more, and that also meant nightmares. Drowning, blood, burning, pain, so many nightmares. And they were different, still filled with twisted versions of whatever torment the day had inflicted upon them, but also a new fear, abandonment, yelling, hurt. Their parents' faces melt away as their mind takes them to a rooftop, a familiar rooftop. What happened if they hadn't run away? Hurt. They were alone. Alone. 𝐻𝐡𝐚 felt a jolt of pain as their nails scratched at the burns on their arm, snapping them out of their spiral. They looked at the blood on their fingers and sighed, wrapping the new wound with what little bandages they had left. They had run out of burn cream a while ago, and were yet to steal more, so their plan was to avoid Bakugo as much as possible, at least until they could steal more. It was a risky plan. When he figured out what they were doing, they would be in so much more trouble than if they had just let him catch them. 𝐻𝐡𝐚 sighed as they looked at their blanket nest. They didn't want to sleep, but they really didn't want to go on patrol and risk running into Eraserhead. They didn't want to face the disappointment they were sure he felt. Sighing, they looked out at the night sky. It was already dark, way past their usual patrol times, but better late than never, right? 𝐲𝐴 noticed some shouting and crashing from the next street over, which abruptly stopped with a pair of thuds. Parkering over, he saw what looked to be the aftermath of a drunk fight, if the stench of alcohol that surrounded the area was any indication. And checking on the unconscious people was Wraith. The vigilante then quickly scaled the nearby fire escape, getting out of the scene before any police showed up. 𝐲𝐴 immediately wanted to run up to them and make sure they were safe, and then maybe ask for answers. But that went so poorly last time, so he took his husband's advice and decided to stay calm. 𝐻𝐡𝐚 stared at Eraserhead. Well, there goes the plan of avoiding him. 𝐻𝐡𝐚 mentally braced himself for any kind of insult that he could possibly throw at them. Hey Wraith. Eraserhead looked oddly awkward, which seemed so out of place with the image of a fearsome underground hero. 𝐻𝐡𝐚 took a deep breath and sat down near the hero. Hey Eraserhead. 𝐻𝐡𝐚 signed hesitantly. A long silence stretched between the two. 𝐻𝐡𝐚 heard a sigh from Eraserhead. "Are you okay?" And wasn't that an interesting question? Were they okay? No, not really. They hadn't been okay for a long time, but they weren't about to admit that to Eraserhead. "Yeah, I'm fine." "All right, well, I'm sorry about the last conversation that we had." Honestly, 𝐻𝐡𝐚 didn't know it was possible for someone so intimidating to be so awkward. It would be funny if they weren't the subject of the conversation. Why, it was my fault for running away. Why was Eraserhead looking at them oddly? They didn't say anything weird, right? You don't have to apologize. Look, you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to pause. 𝐻𝐸 certainly didn't want to talk about it. Keep the pretense a little longer. Pretend that they could be cared for just a little longer. They waited for the hero to demand an answer. Eraserhead just sighed and sat down next to them. He seemed to be thinking about something. Shadow looked at the vigilante, who seemed even smaller than normal. This was not going the way he had hoped. Quick, what could he do to break this tension? Wait, the dinner that Hisashi packed. Food was always a good peace offering, right? Izuku looked up at a rustling sound. Eraserhead was holding out an onigiri towards them. They looked at him. Their silence must have conveyed their confusion. Are you hungry? Izuku stayed silent. Why was Eraserhead offering them food? What did he want from them? Or maybe he was just going to pull it away the second they reached for it. Apparently Eraserhead took their silence as a question. Well, you don't have to take it. I just thought you might want. It had been literal years since they'd had something better than stolen bread or stolen energy bars, or stolen anything really. Maybe it would be nice. Wraith cautiously reached out a hand towards the offered food, and Shadow was reminded of a feral kitten, so he sat very, very still. And as soon as their hand closed around the onigiri, they yanked their hand backwards, like they expected it to be taken away from them. Another concerning thing to investigate. The vigilante turned their head away and lifted their mask. Shadow turned his head away. The vigilante was probably trying to preserve their identity, and he'd respect that. The two of them sat in silence for a while until Shadow heard Wraith stand up. He turned his head to face them again. Thank you for the food. Izuku watched as Eraserhead's mouth twitched into a barely there smile. It's no problem, he stood up with them, and that smile was gone. We've still got the rest of our patrols to complete. He turned to Izuku. See you tomorrow, Wraith. The hero parkered away, leaving Wraith standing alone. Yet somehow, they didn't feel alone at all. They felt the warmth of someone who actually cared about them. Or at least someone who cared about their vigilante self. Eraserhead was right. They should get back to patrol. Izuku spent the rest of the night thinking about that interaction. Maybe they could get used to this. Shadow looked around as he landed on a now familiar rooftop. It had been a month since that awkward first step, and the two of them had been meeting on this rooftop every day before and after their patrols. Shadow usually showed up first, with Wraith joining him a few minutes after. They'd chat and then head off on their own patrol routes, or what counted as a patrol route for Wraith, as they apparently just went wherever they felt like. Seeing that the vigilante had yet to show up, Shadow sat down and waited. After a few minutes, he heard a familiar thud from behind him. Wraith walked up to the edge of the rooftop and sat down next to him. Hey Eraser, hope I didn't keep you waiting. Don't worry about it. We have other things to worry about. It seems like there's been more criminal activity near the south end. Izuku hummed to themselves. That matched up with what they'd been experiencing on patrols. But those were always drug rings, not always the same ones either. They should probably leave whatever that was to the heroes. Nothing too serious. Probably not. But Detective Tsukachi asked me to keep an eye on that area just in case, Eraserhead said with a sigh. Just great. More work for me. Izuku knew that he didn't actually mind. From tagging along with the heroes' patrols, Izuku had learnt more of his personality. And melodramatic was certainly not a trait they had expected Eraserhead of all people to have, and yet here they are. Well, I could always tag along. It would be more efficient, and we could cover more ground, right? Honestly, Izuku barely had any idea what they were talking about, but they were planning on going towards the south end anyway, and they didn't really want to deal with all that fighting alone. Just keep up. Eraserhead parkered away, leaving Izuku to try and catch up. They smiled under their mask. Over the last month, Izuku found that having someone to talk to, someone who didn't immediately avoid their presence, was one of the best feelings they'd ever felt. They still hadn't told the hero about their analysis. They didn't need to ruin the peace between them with their creepy notes, and Eraserhead definitely didn't need to know about the entry that he had in their notebook. Despite all of that, they smiled underneath their masks, soon catching up to the hero as the two of them jumped between the buildings of Musutafu. Shadow should have known something would happen. Though, to be fair, nothing had happened almost all night, but just before the two of them were about to head back to their rooftop, trouble struck. Wraith had been fighting some mugger with an enhancement quirk when she yanked the metal staff out of the vigilante's hand, at which point they had immediately backed off, desperately dodging the woman's powered strikes. It was like someone else had begun fighting, since Wraith had suddenly become much more erratic in their movements. The mugger managed to get a good hit on the vigilante before Shadow could restrain her. He had immediately dragged Wraith out of the alleyway they'd been fighting in, despite the fact that they insisted that they were completely fine. Shadow was concerned. It was like they had lost all confidence the second that they were weaponless, not to mention their hand-to-hand skills could use a lot of work. Are you okay? He asked them, and his voice was definitely not concerned. I'm fine. Plus I managed to get my staff back, so let's get going. Wraith tried to jump away only to be entangled in a length of capture scarf. Shadow glared at them, erasure activating on instinct. It really was like trying to deal with his students, the reckless brats. All right, now that I know you're okay, what the hell? Izuku braced themselves for whatever would get yelled at them. What happened? How did they mess up? Was it because they couldn't defeat that mugger? They knew it was dangerous to get their hopes up. Of course this wouldn't last. Why would anyone want them around? You could have gotten seriously hurt. That's it. No yelling. Nothing about how much of a waste of space they were. Izuku looked up at Eraserhead, head tilting in confusion. The hero sighed. You clearly don't know how to fight without that staff of yours. Did you ever try and learn hand-to-hand combat? He looked more concerned than angry, although there was some of that too. Izuku silently shook their head and tried to sign something before realizing that their hands were pinned to their side. Eraserhead seemed to notice that too and untangled them, only enough that their hands were free. They were still unable to move. If the hero could see their face right now, he'd see the most sheepish look someone could possibly have. I never really got the chance to learn any hand-to-hand, Izuku signed, looking down at their shoes in shame. What? 𝐬𝐴 stared at the vigilante in pure disbelief. What on earth? How the hell does someone not get the chance to learn a basic combat skill? Honestly, it's like they didn't even try. And the irritation in the back of his mind grew. Did they think that they could just get by with whatever quirk they had? Unlikely. From what 𝐬𝐴 has seen, their quirk was most likely non-combative, in which case any sensible person would train their fighting skills to compensate. Wraith seemed to shrink in on themselves as they hesitantly started signing again. Well, running away from bullies every day only does so much. Something about that sentence rang alarm bells in 𝐬𝐴's mind. Bullies. That's how a kid would describe their mean classmates, not a grown adult talking about other people. Why would Wraith? Oh, shit. 𝐬𝐴 didn't quite know how to approach this situation. If his suspicions were correct, Wraith was probably a kid, maybe high school age or younger. Wraith. 𝐬𝐴 took a quiet breath. How old are you? He'd asked the question before, of course, but every time Wraith would deflect by changing the topic, he'd thought that it was to preserve their identity. But if they were a kid, a lot of things were starting to make sense. Wraith immediately tensed at his question. 𝐬𝐴 could see the gears turning in their head. Why do you ask? They looked ready to run, and they had started struggling against the capture weapon. Calm down. I only asked because, well, you said that you were being bullied. Adults don't usually call people bullies. 𝐬𝐴 saw the moment that they froze and looked like they desperately wanted to curl in on themselves. That was basically all the confirmation 𝐬𝐴 needed. You're a kid, aren't you? It was less of a question and more of a statement, his mind already looking through past behavior and noting all the signs that were there from the beginning. Fuck. This was a kid, with barely any fighting experience, running around and being a vigilante. 𝐀𝐦 stared at the hero next to them, knowing that he'd probably realized by now, this was bad. They couldn't escape and Eraserhead was probably going to yell at them or hurt them. They should have thought about what they were saying. How did they let that slip? It wasn't like they had let their guard down, right? Izuku realized that was exactly what had happened. They'd gotten too comfortable and forgotten that they were supposed to be pretending. Not that they were that good at it in the first place, but this was the worst slip-up they could have possibly made aside from telling him that they were quirkless. Hey, kid, can you hear me? Izuku realized that they'd zoned out and looked back at Eraserhead, and took a step back. Wait, what? Wasn't the capture weapon? With a start they realized that the hero had freed them sometime during their spiral. Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry. Don't apologize, kid. You didn't do anything wrong. Izuku would have disagreed, but if he thought they didn't do anything wrong, maybe they didn't. The hero sat down a little bit away from them, giving them space. The silence stretched for a good minute before Eraserhead spoke. So is there any way I could convince you to quit being a vigilante? Izuku thought about it. Would they be willing to quit? They knew they should say yes, but really, being Wraith was all they really had. It meant that they could make a difference. Izuku shook their head. There was no way they'd ever give up not being useless, even if it was pretend. Eraserhead sighed. I thought so. In that case, I can't have you running around without at least knowing how to fight properly. Izuku had to do a double take. Did that mean he was just going to let them continue to be a vigilante? Eraserhead must have seen their confusion. I'll let you keep doing this, as long as you follow some rules. First, you're not going to patrol alone. I'll take you with me during my patrols. Second, you listen to me. If I say you're not getting involved, listen. Lastly, we need to work on your hand-to-hand skills, so I'll be training you, and until I say you're ready, you're not going to fight anyone. Got it? Izuku nodded rapidly. Good. How about we start your first lesson now? Izuku barely had time to react before they were being pinned to the ground by the hero. Lesson 1. Never let your guard down. Always be ready to dodge an attack. Try again. Izuku got up, ready to dodge another punch, and was almost immediately tangled in capture scarf. What did I just say? Be ready for anything. Shaking their head, Izuku focused on Eraserhead's movements. This time they dodged a punch, but was then taken out by the next one. The next few attempts went roughly the same way, with Izuku being taken out in seconds. At some point they managed to dodge a few attacks, but they still got pinned within a minute. After what was likely an hour but felt much longer to Izuku, Eraserhead stood back and didn't seem to be attacking the second they got up again. It's getting late for both of us. We should get back to our homes. A pause. I'm guessing your parents aren't worried about you. Izuku almost laughed. Their parents didn't even know where they were. Still, there was no point in messing up again. They're probably asleep right now. I can get back to my house easily enough. And before the hero could ask more questions, they jumped down the fire escape and ducked into an alleyway that they knew was practically invisible from above. Sure enough, they got home easily. Flopping into their blanket nest, they found that they could fall asleep much easier than most days. They knew they'd probably be sore in the morning, but honestly, they couldn't find it in them to care. Not when they were smiling giddily from the realization that they were actually cared about, at least by one person. Their sleep was blissfully nightmare-free. Humming filled the warehouse as Izuku gathered their backpack and notes. Their uniform was ratty and moth-eaten. Not to mention the numerous patchwork fixes from the times they'd tried to stitch up the holes they had gotten from various bullies. There were several patches where the stitching was falling apart. They'd have to patch them up again. Not that they could afford a new one. They also debate taking their notebook with them. They'd almost filled out analysis number 8. They'd have to steal a new book soon. Ultimately, they decided to take it. Even if the risk was there, they could leave it in their bag during school, and there was a relatively new hero patrolling in the area. And without access to the internet, they had to chase down the heroes if they wanted to analyze them, or hear about them from their classmates' conversations. Izuku guessed that they'd be a few minutes early to class as they walked down the road. Passing by a food vendor, they tried to snatch a sandwich, sneaking it from the stand when the vendor's back was turned, and then slipping into an alleyway before the man could notice. Izuku jogged as they ate the sandwich, hoping to get to Aldera early so as to avoid the majority of the bullies. They tried to get to class without incident, but as always, Bakugo had also shown up early. He always shows up early because he knows that Izuku does that too. Of course, they couldn't avoid him. No, that would mean a worse punishment later, and the last time that it happened, Izuku shuddered to think about that. So the day started off rather slow. For some reason, everyone else seemed to leave them alone today. It was probably because they were all too excited for the weekend to think about a useless Deku. Fridays were always better for them. Izuku sat down at their desk. It seemed that no one had gotten to it yet. That was sure to change the second that the next class bell rang. The next few classes went mostly okay, other than the usual jeers. Then lunch happened, and, as usual, the other students hunted them through the halls. They remembered which students to take hits from, and which students they could avoid without repercussions as they tried to get through lunch without too much incident. Sitting peacefully at their rooftop hideout, Izuku took out their notebook, looking around cautiously to make sure no one would see them. Sometimes students would wander up to the roof or be dragged there, and usually Izuku hid whenever that happened. There was no way they could let anyone find their hideout, or they'd lose the only place they could hide from the torture, and then, shaking themselves out of their thoughts, not wanting to envision what could happen. Still, they should be very careful, especially when they had their notebook with them. Izuku heard screams from the stairwell as some poor soul was dragged up to the roof. Bakugo practically kicked down the door as his lackeys shoved someone in front of them. Izuku felt a pang of sympathy for the poor soul that had gotten on his bad side today. The safest option would be staying hidden. So Izuku ran out onto the main space of the roof and put themselves between Bakugo's explosions and the student behind them, their hands desperately clutching onto their notebook. Wait, they still had their notebook with them? No. They curled over the book trying to block it from Veo and desperately hoping it hadn't been seen. Oi nerd, what the fuck is that? Bakugo ripped the notebook out of their hands, still keeping the stalker notes. Fucking creepy Deku. I thought I taught you to stop that. He opened the book and started reading through it, mocking the contents the entire time. Izuku watched as Bakugo grinned. You know, this shit's creepy as fuck. I could do us all a favor and get rid of it. They watched as he grabbed pages out of the book, tearing them out of the book, lighting off explosions, destroying most of the pages, turning them to ash and scraps. A whole 7 months of notes, gone, just like that. Izuku saw that only 3 pages were left. They couldn't see which hero they were on, but they felt themselves tearing up. They just couldn't believe it. Before they could even think, they grabbed the last 3 pages and held them tight to their chest, curling in to protect them. They didn't know why they were protecting something that didn't deserve to exist. But they had always been selfish. The notes brought them undeserved joy, and they selfishly protected it. Even though Bakugo had not stopped trying to get them, even though the explosions burned, Izuku took them numbly. Tears threatened to fall from their eyes as Bakugo appeared to switch targets from the papers to Izuku, yelling at them. They wouldn't have been able to talk back even if they wanted to. You stupid, useless Deku. Why do you even bother trying? I wonder why you haven't been killed yet. Someone really should leave you and your creepy muttering and stalker notes for dead. Actually, why don't you do everyone a favor and find a quiet ditch to die in? Quit being a burden to everyone. Do your parents still put up with you? They shouldn't. Creepy stupid Deku with your creepy fucking books. You know, I bet even if you died, no one would care. I wouldn't. Izuku was left burned and battered as Bakugo apparently decided that he'd done enough, leaving them to painfully pull themselves up, a soft crinkling sound reminding them of the pages from their notebook. They checked which hero had been spared. It was the pages they'd done on Eraserhead, probably the most detailed pages they had on any hero. They stared at the rest of the pages, or what was left of them. Don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. They'd have to redo all the entries into a new notebook, and they wouldn't be able to take notes on the new hero until they stole a new one. The entire rest of the day was filled with mocking laughs as apparently Bakugo had been complaining about their notebook, and everyone had heard. Maki-sensei scolded them for being a distraction and gave them detention, which Izuku panicked about. Normally detention meant the teachers would just yell at them about whatever they'd done, but they also needed to get home, patch up their injuries, and go for patrol, not to mention the combat training afterwards. Detention was just as hellish as they had expected, but they had no time to think about that. If they didn't hurry, they'd be late. The second they got home, they started patching up their burns, the worst ones at least, since they needed to conserve their remaining bandages. It was already dark by the time they left. They just hoped that Eraser hadn't been waiting for too long. Of course, they were so caught up in their hurry that they didn't realize they'd stuffed the pages into their hoodie pocket instead of leaving them at the warehouse. Wraith had been acting odd all patrol. First they'd shown up late, which by itself wasn't too unusual. 𝗓𝗪 just assumed that they had been held back for some reason. They also kept messing with their hoodie and was generally being more fidgety than normal. At least they weren't fighting most of the criminals. They might have been practicing for over a week now, but still had a lot to learn before they were ready to fight armed opponents. Still, 𝗓𝗪 knew something was bothering the kid. At the end of patrol, the two of them landed on a rooftop. Wraith immediately fell into a practice fighting stance, still a little slower than 𝗓𝗪 would have liked, but it was a start. But whatever was throwing them off earlier was clearly still a distraction. The kid had gotten even better at dodging, even if they still couldn't land a hit on him, but today they just kept getting pinned by the same moves they were dodging with ease yesterday. 𝗓𝗪 stopped the spar abruptly. What's wrong, Wraith? Izuku was panicking. Eraser had noticed something. What gave them away? Nothing's wrong, they signed, hoping that the hero would give it up, but they weren't so lucky. Kid, you've been acting strange all day. Don't try to act like you're fine. Really, nothing's wrong. By the glare they got, it was clear that Eraser wasn't going to believe that. So Izuku changed tactics. You don't have to worry about it, Eraser sighed tiredly. Izuku tensed. Nothing good came of people being annoyed by them. You know, you can tell me if something happened. I'm not going to be mad or anything. Goddammit, why did he have to sound so genuine? Izuku silently willed themselves not to cry in front of the hero. I swear, it really wasn't that bad. It was probably for the best anyways. They started pacing around frantically as they tried to convince Eraser that nothing was wrong, and that he shouldn't worry about it. 𝗓𝗪 shook his head. This kid, he thought as they continued pacing around, signing so frantically that he was having trouble figuring out what they were saying. While they were pacing, a piece of paper drifted out of their hoodie. It looked like a mildly burnt notebook page. 𝗓𝗪 picked it up to give it back to Wraith, and hopefully snapped the kid out of whatever spiral they were going through, when he noticed his hero name on the top of the page. It looked like an analysis of his quirk, with notes about how it affects his fighting style written in the margins. Overall, it was rather accurate. The hypotheses were clearly labeled, some right, some wrong. It was the kind of stuff expected from the third years at UA. Kid, did you write this? He asked, showing them the piece of paper. Izuku paused as their eyes immediately focused on the notebook page in Eraser's hand. And the panic they'd felt earlier hit them again full force. Oh no, he's going to think it's creepy, and then he'll be mad. And Eraser was saying something. Izuku couldn't quite make it out past the sound of their own heartbeat pounding in their ears. He vaguely sounded concerned, and Izuku realized that they'd started crying. They silently cursed their traitorous tear ducts as they desperately tried to control their breathing. 𝗓𝗪 didn't quite know what to do. Yes, he knew how to help with a panic attack, but Wraith didn't seem to be hearing anything he said. They seemed to be calming down though, and after some time their breathing returned to normal. After a few seconds of silence, they started shakily signing. I'm sorry. I know the notes are really creepy and dumb and weird. And the kid continued to sign, but with their shaky hands it was impossible to make out what they were trying to say. What do you mean, creepy? This looks like a pretty good analysis to me. At that, Wraith's head shot up. What do you mean? Everyone thinks it's creepy, and everyone is wrong. This is valuable information to know about people, not to mention it's pretty good, and most of the stuff here is correct. Wraith seemed to be confused, understandably so. Clearly they've been told that their analysis was creepy. They clearly weren't expecting him to say otherwise. My friend, he said that it was creepy and should be destroyed. They reached into their pocket and took out 2 other pages. Your friend sounds more like a bully to me. 𝗓𝗪 made note of the burn marks on each page. Did he cause those burn marks? Yeah, these are the only pages I managed to save from that notebook. Wraith had started shaking again. He said that the book was stupid and useless, like me. 𝐲𝐴 had to suppress his rage at that. Where the hell were any adults when this happened? He said. What? Wraith shrunk in on themselves at that, and 𝐲𝐴 had to take a breath to calm down. Sorry, I'm not mad at you. I'm angry at your friend. Wraith slightly relaxed, seemingly reassured that 𝐲𝐴 was being genuine. Where were your parents? Didn't they stop him? Wraith shook their head. We were at school, and before you ask, the teachers wouldn't have done anything. They might have encouraged him. It's fine. I mean, I can take a hit, and it's not like I'm worth anything anyways. 𝐲𝐴 felt rage at that. What kind of teacher would do such a thing? He'd only been teaching for a year by now, but every other teacher he knew would rather face 100 villains than let one of their students get bullied like this, for someone to encourage it. If he ever met Wraith's teachers, he was going to tear them apart. The second half of that sentence was also rather worrying. Kid, why on earth would you think that you're not worth anything? Izuku froze. Shit, why did they say that? There was no way out of this corner, and part of them knew what was going to happen next. But still, another part desperately wanted to keep playing this charade, even though there was no way they'd be able to talk themselves out of this one. They took a deep breath and tensed, ready to run away at the first sign of hostility. I'm Quirkless. The first thing that went through 𝐲𝐴's mind were the statistics. Quirkless kids were almost always abused or neglected at home. They were suicide-baited on average twice a day, and the statistics for actual suicide were alarming. That combined with the murder statistics meant that only about 1 in 50 kids ever made it past 15. And those are old statistics, from a few generations back. When quirklessness was more common, they didn't have any statistics for the newer generations. No one cared to find out. 𝐲𝐴 knew it was worse. Wraith seemed to be ready to flee, like they expected 𝐲𝐴 to hate them like everyone else. So, you're still human. You don't deserve to be treated like that. Izuku stared at the hero, both confused and still anxious. There was no way that he actually believed that, right? He was just messing with them. But I'm useless. It would be a favor to the world if I ended up dead. Kid, listen to me. You aren't useless just because you don't have a quirk. A lot of people don't even use their quirk through their life. Izuku thought about it for a second. That was true. They hadn't even thought about it that way. They really could live a normal life without a quirk, but they didn't want a normal life. They wanted an impossible dream. They had one question they wanted to ask. Eraser, do you think someone like me could be a hero? 𝐲𝐴 paused at that question. Could someone quirkless be a hero? 𝐲𝐴 didn't know the exact answer to that. There'd never been a quirkless hero before, but did that mean it was impossible? 𝐲𝐴 thought about it a bit more. If a quirkless person ever did become a hero, they'd have to work a lot harder. They'd need skill to compensate. A lot of support gear probably. Not to mention, even with that, they'd most likely have to stay underground or at the lowest end of the rankings. But maybe. Izuku got more and more nervous as the silence continued until finally Eraser spoke. Why do you want to be a hero? Izuku felt disappointment and acceptance flood them. I know it's unreasonable, but I didn't say anything about that. I just asked why you want to be a hero. Izuku paused at that. Surely he didn't actually want the answer. I want to be a hero so I can help people, so I can make sure people don't have to be hurt and suffer, even if you never make it far in the rankings, and even if you'll have to work 10 times harder than anyone with a quirk. Izuku felt a surge of determination at that. Yes, I don't care about the rankings, and I know I'd have to work much harder than most people, but I would do it if it meant I could help people. Eraser smiled, a rare expression on the man. Then I don't see why you couldn't be a hero. With the right training, Izuku felt themselves start to cry. Eraser had thought that they could be a hero. Without thinking, they hugged the hero. They mildly panicked, ready to apologize. But before they could let go, they felt 2 arms wrapping around them in a hug. The sense of safety brought even more tears to their face. 𝐲𝐴 hugged the crying Vigilante tightly. If they were anyone else, he'd have pushed them off by now, but he had to admit he'd gotten attached to the Vigilante. No, kid. This was a kid who everyone has hurt, and one that desperately needed someone to believe in them. 𝐲𝐴 let them cry into his shirt. Even after Wraith had stopped crying, neither of them moved for a few minutes. 𝐲𝐴 didn't mind. Izuku let go after what felt like forever. Even then, they were reluctant to let go from the warmth. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Don't apologize, kid. It's fine. Still, I don't think I finished explaining. Izuku felt their face heat up in embarrassment. Sorry. Eraser just shook his head. Quit saying sorry, kid. It's not your fault. Izuku tried to sign another sorry, but a glare from the hero stopped them. I was going to say that I could train you, if you think you're up for it. Izuku nodded vigorously. Yes, of course, I'll do whatever it takes. Good, we'll start tomorrow, all right. I promise, I'll work as hard as possible so that I'll be ready. Wraith was nodding so fast that 𝐲𝐴 was half worried that their head might fall off, and he was sure they were grinning brightly underneath that mask. 𝐲𝐴 sighed internally. He could already tell this was going to be migraine-inducing. You're going to be quite the problem child, aren't you? He said. Wraith looked confused for a second before they realized there was no malice behind those words and continuing to practically bounce with energy. 𝐲𝐴 smiled, hiding his face with the capture weapon so that no one could see. This kid was just so precious. How could anyone hurt them? 𝐲𝗏 swore to himself that he was going to make sure no one ever heard the kid again. Izuku grumbled sleepily as the sun shined into the warehouse, waking them up rather abruptly. It seemed that they'd slept in, not a common occurrence, but last night had been an exhausting time. Izuku almost believed that it had been a dream, but the half-burnt notebook pages that lay next to them proved otherwise. Honestly, they still couldn't believe it. Eraserhead knew they were quirkless, and instead of abandoning them, he'd still cared. He even thought that they could be a hero if they worked hard enough. He offered to train them. Part of them still wondered if this was a cruel trick, if after all this Eraser would still turn his back on them. But they knew that they had to hope that this truly was their chance, that they really could become a hero. And today was going to be their first day of training. Izuku knew that being a hero was more than knowing how to punch bad guys, so they were curious as to what would be added to their combat lessons and what was going to be completely new to them. Of course, that was for the afternoon. For now, they decided to relax, which was basically impossible, so instead they sighed and figured that going for a jog would be a better idea. 𝐲𝗏 paced the length of the living room, over and over and over again. Ḥizashi watched him from the couch moonlight. You still haven't entirely told me what's going on, and you're going to wear out the carpet at this rate. Wraith is quirkless. Wait, quirkless? Ḥizashi thought that he had surely misheard. Even with his hearing aids in, he must have missed something. Quirkless. It was almost unheard of for a kid these days to be quirkless. But 𝐲𝗏 nodded, confirming what should have been an impossibility. The kid was probably being bullied, or even abused at home. Ḥizashi knew the statistics purely because of his husband's work, and he didn't know all of them, but still. Is the little listener okay? No, they're being hurt at school, and apparently the teachers are encouraging it. The last bit was spat out with fury, and Ḥizashi felt a similar way. So Wraith's not just a vigilante. They're a quirkless child too. That's concerning, but I still don't see why you've been stressing out since you got back last night. They want to be a hero, Ḥizashi internally sighed. All kids wanted to be heroes, but he didn't know if a quirkless person could even be a hero. Something on his expression must have shown his hesitance because his husband interrupted him before he could say anything. I know, it's never been done before, but that kid's determined, and, well, they know how difficult it would be for them, and I agreed to train them. What? Ḥizashi had to do a double take on that. You agreed to teach a child, younger than our students, how to be a hero. You of all people. He honestly couldn't imagine his grumpy husband actively volunteering to do any kind of work dealing with children. Then again, 𝐲𝗏 always was a softie. A glare from 𝐲𝗏 was enough to shut him up, I know. But the kid needs all the help they can get. And this way I can make sure they don't get hurt being a vigilante, not to mention that someone has to be a responsible adult in their life. Ḥizashi wanted to laugh at the last comment. 𝐲𝗏 was far from responsible. The man was an insomniac caffeine addict who slept in a sleeping bag. It was odd how concerned 𝐲𝗏 was. It was not in the way that he would normally be concerned about a civilian. It was almost like a concerned parent. Ḥizashi grinned. So when were you going to tell me you were such a dad? 𝐲𝗏 froze on the spot, processing the words before glaring full force at Ḥizashi. I am not a dad, Ḥizashi. Then why are you acting like one? Come on, Shu. Do I need to get some adoption papers or something? Ḥizashi had to hold back laughter as his husband tried to argue back. I'm kidding, mostly. 𝐲𝗏 grumbled and started pacing again. Wraith is not my kid, but that isn't the point here. I just hope I can teach them everything they need to know. Ḥizashi sighed and pulled his husband onto the couch with him to stop him from moving. Relax, dear. You just have to teach them the same way you're teaching the 1A students. Not to mention you've got years to prepare the kid for high school. And if you need help, I'm always here, and I'm sure Nimari would love to teach this kid. I guess you're right, of course I am. Ḥizashi paused. So when can I meet them? 𝐲𝗏 looked caught off guard at the question. I don't know. I could ask them, I guess. Ḥizashi grinned brightly. Yes. I can't wait to meet our kid. Not our kid, whatever you say, dear. Izuku felt jittery as they ran down the alleyways to the fire escape that led to the rooftop where Eraser was probably waiting for them. This was it, their chance to be a hero. They quickly and quietly scaled the fire escape. It appeared that Eraser hadn't shown up yet, but they wouldn't count out a surprise attack to start the training. So they stayed alert and searched the roof for any signs that the hero was there. Nothing. It seemed that he really was running late. That was odd. Izuku wandered around the rooftop kicking stones as they waited, unable to sit still. Finally, soft footfalls alerted them to someone's presence, and they turned around as Eraser landed on the roof. Hey, Eraser. Eraser nodded at them. Wraith. Sorry I'm late. I had to take a detour. He reached into his scarf and pulled out a notebook. How was he keeping that in there? Before Izuku could ponder that oddity, Eraser continued talking. Since your last one got destroyed, I figured you could use a new one. It was a thick notebook with a plain black cover. Izuku took the book, holding it carefully as if it was a prized treasure. Anyways, are you ready for your first heroics lesson? Izuku nodded. Yes, Eraser-sensei. You can call me Aizawa. I'm your teacher now. You don't have to use my hero name. Izuku's eyes widened, and they nodded vigorously, and they were about to correct their statement when they paused. Ieyazawa seemed to realize the issue quickly. Right. My sign name. He did the sign for the letter S followed by the sign for cat. Izuku was surprised he even had a sign name. And why the sign for cat? Okay, Aizawa-sensei. Izuku signed, practically bouncing on the spot. Alright, he grinned. And oh boy, that was terrifying. Let's begin. Izuku immediately dropped into a defensive stance, but an attack didn't come. Still, by now they knew better than to drop their guard. Good. Your reaction times are getting better. Try and hit me. Izuku was only momentarily hesitant before throwing a punch at Aizawa. He dodged and stood still. Try again. Izuku did, a few times, and then Aizawa started lecturing them. Your punches need to be quicker, and you're not thinking this through. Izuku was starting to get annoyed, but stopped for a moment and thought about it. They couldn't hit Aizawa head on, but what else could they do? They saw the hero reaching for his capture weapon, so they shook their head and continued trying to attack the hero while they thought. They couldn't physically beat the hero, but they didn't need to beat him, they just needed to land a single punch. They thought back to their notebooks. Some of the weaknesses listed didn't apply to them, but there was one. Izuku backed off and waited for Aizawa to attack them. After a few moments he obliged. They were used to dodging his attacks by now. This may have been a mistake, since they still needed to find an opening, which was a rare thing. It was a good hour before such an opportunity arose. They dodged a kick and grabbed some of the gravel and dust from the roof and threw it at the hero's face. Izuku had created a very small opening in which Aizawa was temporarily blinded, so they took it and managed to get a single finger on the hero's leg before being pinned down by the hero. Aizawa paused and released them. Well, you didn't quite manage to hit me, but you did manage to touch me, which is more than I expected. He sat down at the edge of the roof and gestured for them to sit down as well. You were going easy on me. You could have pinned me much quicker if you were using your capture weapon well. You're still a kid, and you just started learning how to fight, and even if that's not everything you need to learn, your stealth and agility are what allowed you to avoid me the first few months that I was chasing you. And I wasn't holding back then. I guess you're right, you really need some self-confidence, huh? Well, you're the only person who believes in me. How do I know you're not wrong? Well, I know at least one other person who believes in you. Hell, he's been wanting to meet you for a while now. Izuku's head whipped around to stare at Aizawa, who snorted at the reaction. My husband has been pestering me about whether he could help train you. Husband? Izuku honestly couldn't picture the tough and scary Eraserhead having any kind of relationship, let alone being married. Got a problem with that? Izuku shook their head quickly. Good. So, he wants to meet me. And how can he help me train, unless he's also a hero? You're married to another hero? Izuku asked. Aizawa only nodded as confirmation. Who? I'll give you a hint. He's known for being very loud. The possibilities raced through Izuku's mind. Being loud. Maybe a voice quirk. There were a few. It had to be a male hero. And he was probably located in Musutafu, which meant only one person. Presentmic. They had to fingerspell his name since they didn't have a sign name for him. And they didn't think that just using the sign for microphone would get their point across. Yeah, Present Mikey wants to help train me. Aizawa nodded. If you're alright with that, and Izuku felt their inner fanboy jump and squeal at the idea. Yes, absolutely. I can't believe it. He's such a cool hero. Izuku's brain went on overdrive as they started listing out every way that Present Mike was an incredible hero. Shouta shook his head at the antics. He knew the kid knew a lot about heroes, but actually seeing that knowledge was amusing to watch. Hazashi was going to be stoked to find out that the kid was such a fan of him. Eventually it started getting much darker and Shouta had to remind Wraith to get back to their home. He didn't bother trying to follow them. They'd probably lose him pretty quickly. Still, he was worried about the kid. Their parents probably neglected them. But without Wraith's identity he couldn't do anything. But still, he wasn't going to tell Hazashi about that. Shouta knew he'd start making jokes about Shouta being Wraith's dad, which was false. There was no way Wraith was his student, not his child. Not at all. Izuku rushed down the alleyways. Their bright yellow backpack, filled with their notebook, pencils, and a bottle of water, bouncing as they jumped over trash and veered around corners. They were headed towards their rooftop. It had been a week and a half since the first lesson and Izuku was getting much better at combat. Plus they were learning about the law, since that was important to being a good hero. Stuff about heroes, villains, and vigilantes and the difference, legally speaking, as well as the restrictions on quirk usage, something that didn't really apply to them, but Aizawa-sensei had insisted that it was necessary. He had tried to help with their analyses. But just because you can do something doesn't mean you can teach it to others. Izuku was still happy that they could even talk about their analyses to someone. They got to the rooftop and waiting up there was Aizawa and, was that Present Mike? He wasn't facing them but there was no mistaking that hairstyle. Izuku knew that he had wanted to meet them. They also knew from their mentors complaining that his schedule didn't really allow enough free time to do so. They could also hear Present Mike talking. From the other end of the roof, Aizawa looked like he was already regretting bringing him here. The second they moved, Izuku saw Aizawa look towards them and quickly turn away, hiding his face in his scarf. What was that about? They walked up to the pair. Present Mike was still turned away from them. "Sho, why are you smiling?" Present Mike asked suspiciously. Aizawa only shrugged. Izuku had gotten used to the fact that Aizawa could hear them no matter what they did, so they didn't entirely expect to catch anyone off guard. So when they stepped into view, they certainly didn't expect the shriek that cut through the air, quickly quietened by a quirked glare from Aizawa, who seemed annoyed. Although Izuku got the feeling that he hadn't acknowledged them just to mess with Present Mike. "Hi sensei, you brought Mike with you." Izuku tilted their head at the voice hero. "Hey little listener, it's great to finally meet ya." The name's Yamada Hazashi. Yamada grinned, and Izuku had to turn away from the sheer brightness of it. "How on earth was this Aizawa's husband?" "Nice to meet you, Yamada. Aizawa-sensei talks about you a lot." Izuku was sure that they were bouncing in place right now. "Aw, Sho, why didn't you tell me Wraith was this precious?" Yamada was still smiling. "Precious?" Izuku didn't think that was right, but they soaked in the praise anyway. They heard a familiar whooshing sound and quickly dodged the capture weapon which was trying to wrap their arms. "Alright, let's get to training." Aizawa looked at the two with a tired expression inside. "Zashi, don't pout, you can talk to them after." Hazashi was internally squealing as he talked to Wraith. The little listener seemed so nervous and excited all at once that he wondered how they hadn't exploded with all that energy. Of course he'd been hearing about Wraith since his husband first started working on the case, but seeing them in person was just so exciting. And he had been wondering how the kid would behave. When 𝗀𝗏 had first agreed to train Wraith, he mentioned that the kid needed a confidence boost. Hazashi had expected the shy politeness, but he certainly hadn't expected that to continue into their sparring. Wraith spent most of their time dodging, almost always hesitating when going in for a hit. Sure, it was only half a second, but that's a lot of time in a fight. Still, they were doing remarkably well against 𝗀𝗏. It had been at least 3 minutes before they got wrapped up in the capture weapon. Hazashi half expected Wraith to take some time before starting the spar again. But they were immediately back on their feet and clearly very focused on their task. Hazashi was sure that they were completely focused on the battle. Like a lot of the heroic students, he expected that situational awareness, even while fighting, was a skill that 𝗀𝗏 would have to teach them later. But surprisingly, he noticed that, no matter where he moved around the edge of the roof, Wraith specifically avoided moving to that area. They must have been keeping track of his movements as well. Hazashi felt both proud and incredibly sad. Proud because that was a difficult skill to master, and sad for the circumstances that could possibly force a literal child to learn how to track people like that. Izuku scrambled as they tried to get out of the capture scarf. Aizawa was just watching them with amusement, and they couldn't see Yamada's face, but they saw his shoulders shaking as he tried to hide his laughter. Eventually they stopped struggling and let Aizawa untangle them. That was probably the longest spar yet, even if they were still nowhere close to being able to actually hit Aizawa. Izuku had expected Aizawa to start his usual lectures on both the various branches of heroics and the laws they abide by. Instead, Yamada sat down next to them. "Hey little listener, Shu told me that you do analysis. Could I see one?" Izuku was a bit hesitant. They'd only just gotten that new notebook, but there were already quite a few entries, mostly the analyses that had been lost when Bakugo blew up their old notebook. The little white square on the front cover now had neat kanji written on it. Analysis number 8, and Izuku was quite careful with this one, not wanting another incident. They really didn't want something to happen to it, and giving it to someone else was just asking for trouble. But the reasonable part of their mind insisted that Aizawa's husband wouldn't do something like that. So they hesitantly opened their bag and gave Yamada the notebook, nervously fiddling with their fingers as he read. Hazashi flipped through the pages, reading quickly since it was apparent that the kid was nervous about giving him the book. 𝗀𝗏 had told him that they were good, but seeing it in front of him was certainly something. Most of the analyses consisted of 2 pages, one which was just filled with a jumbled stream of thought that barely made any sense, and another one that was much more organized and readable. The organized pages followed a clear pattern. Hero name and quirk details were written at the top along with a short description of the hero's notable characteristics, usually accompanied by a nice drawing of the hero in question. Underneath that there was a bullet point list of possible uses to their quirk as well as a few hypotheses on the details of how the quirk exactly worked. There was also a list of weaknesses and ways to possibly neutralize the hero, ranging from using fire or herbicide against a plant-based hero to cutting off the hands of a hero with a contact quirk. It was all rather impressive. "This is great little listener," Hazashi said as he read the entry on Prism. A hero with the ability to manipulate light into various weapons or simply use it like a laser. While the weaknesses listed included nighttime and closed spaces, one of the suggestions for permanently neutralizing her was to put her in a cell underground so that there was no chance of any light reaching her, noting that if she even had the smallest bit of light she would be able to cut through any bindings. The hypotheses were also interesting to look at, wondering if she controlled light though manipulating the waves, and if so, could she possibly change the color of objects or cause illusions by messing with the wavelength and amplitude to alter people's sight. There are notes on how she used a very direct fighting style with a heavy reliance on her quirk, as well as how exactly her quirk influences the way she fights. Still, there was something missing. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 hadn't worked with Prism at all, but he knew that she was arrogant, and he suspected she never really had a plan for anything. But there was no notes on anything like that. Despite the fact that her personality meant that she was incredibly easy to goad into a fight, surely the kid hadn't missed it. Not when they'd noticed so much else. 𝐷, are these all your notes on Prism? Izuku was surprised by the question but nodded. Well, you seem to have missed a pretty big weakness. Her personality. Izuku tilted their head. Personality? How is that a weakness? What do you mean? Well, she's kind of arrogant. She always acts like the fight is already won for her, meaning that it would be really easy to catch her off guard or lure her into a false sense of security before hitting her with something she wouldn't be prepared to defend against. And it's not just a bad trait that you can take advantage of. Despite her arrogance, she always prioritizes civilian safety. Anyone who's looking to take her down could throw her off by making sure to endanger civilian lives, like taking down a building or causing a fire, maybe even a hostage situation. She'd be too distracted with rescue that she wouldn't notice any attempts you made to kill her. Izuku nodded along as Yamada explained how important knowing your enemy's personality could be. They hadn't realized you could do so much with that aspect of a person, and maybe it was just a little bit validating to hear someone go through a similar thought process to them. Maybe they were talking about murder, but they weren't actually going to follow through on the plans. She's also really underutilizing her quirk. She really only manipulates one bit of light at a time, but I've seen that she can do much more than that. Considering that she can create multiple weapons, it would be reasonable to assume that she could make a barrage of tiny knives if she wanted to. 𝗏𝗏 watched from the side of the roof as 𝐷 and 𝐻𝐻𝐸 continued to talk about the various ways one could kill a hero like Prism. It was getting progressively more implausible as they went on. At some point, 𝐷 had suggested using something that blocks light like a blackout curtain to stop her from seeing the light, meaning that she wouldn't be able to control it. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 had responded by pointing out that blindfolding her would have the same effect, to which 𝐷 had countered that it would be really difficult to get close enough to do that. But if she was already unable to fight back, that would be a good way of neutralizing her. 𝗏𝗏 felt the beginnings of a headache as the both of them switched topics to another hero. It was getting late. Also, he was mildly afraid of whatever chaos he had unleashed by letting the two of them meet. Not that he regretted it. The kid was clearly very happy to have one more person to talk to. 𝗏𝗏 smiled to himself. Still, they needed to get back home if either of them wanted to get any sleep. So he called 𝐻𝐻𝐸 over and said bye to 𝐷. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 promised that he'd try to show up to trainings more often, which made the kid bounce with joy. After they'd gotten home, 𝐻𝐻𝐸 had immediately started talking about how amazing 𝐷 was. They're so smart, 𝗏, and they were so eager to learn. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 grinned. No wonder you got so attached to the kid. They are so sweet. You were right though, their confidence could use some work, but that's why I'm here. At this point, his husband was practically dancing around the room. Our kid is amazing. First of all, they're not our kid yet. No, second of all, I noticed that you were really happy with their analyses. I've really only read a few of them, but they seem impressive considering that they've never been taught how to do that. Imagine what they could do with proper guidance. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 nodded before looking mildly concerned. 𝗏, you realize the only person who'd willingly teach them analysis is Nezu, right? And 𝗏𝗏 paled. Well, there was a thought. Nezu teaching a child. That could only end in disaster or world domination. We are not letting that happen. It's Nezu. He'll find out eventually why. It's not like we could be connected to the kid in any way. Yet, 𝐻𝐻𝐸 smiled at him. I know that the second that you find the kid's identity, you're going to try to adopt them. Admit it, you're their dad now. 𝗏𝗏 rolled his eyes. Not true. I'm their teacher. One of these days you'll see that I'm right. Over the last month and a half, Izuku had slowly gotten accustomed to their new routine. Wake up, go to school, survive school, go to the warehouse, change into vigilante outfit, go to the rooftop, train with Aizawa and sometimes Yamada, patrol with Aizawa, go home, sleep, rinse and repeat. Their notebook was now filling up with new entries, along with revisions on old entries, and in the margins they sometimes wrote stories. Yamada would tell them about the heroes he'd worked with. Their combat skills were also majorly improving. Each spar now usually lasted about 5 minutes, and they even managed to hit back a few times. And Aizawa had drilled them on all kinds of police procedures, to the point where they could recite several heroics laws with ease, or as easily as someone could answer a pop quiz in the middle of a fight. The trolls had also been pretty calm. Maybe it was the fact that Aizawa had stopped watching them like a hawk the entire time, trusting that they could handle themselves fairly well. On the other hand, they were still not allowed to actually help in the fights against armed opponents, which was infuriating. if only because they had to watch Aizawa get hurt more than they would have liked. They could still say they'd helped stop quite a few fistfights lately. They could say with confidence that the time spent with the two heroes was the most enjoyment they'd had since, well, ever. Aizawa was a strict teacher, but he was fair, and underneath all the grumpiness he was soft and caring, even if he showed it in odd ways. Yamada, on the other hand, was the complete opposite, bubbly and bright, always a goofball, but he had a heart of fire, and they were sure he'd raise the earth to protect the ones he cared about. The concern that both of them had for Izuku was nice. It gave them a warm, fuzzy feeling that they couldn't quite place. Izuku snapped himself out of their thoughts as they heard the school bell. They were sitting in class, the last one of the day, and they had zoned out in the middle of it. In their defense, it was mathematics, and this was the fourth time someone had asked a dumb question. As Muto-sensei begrudgingly re-explained the basics of algebra to the class, Izuku was daydreaming about training. They probably shouldn't be doing that, but honestly, they had understood the concept the first time and they were just killing time. They ran out of the classroom, bracing themselves for any stray quirks that the other students would send their way. They had been having a much easier time avoiding people, and they managed to get out of the main doors before something happened. Deku, that something being 𝗵𝘃𝗪. They sighed as they turned around to face 𝗵𝘃𝗪, ready to face whatever the beating of the day would be. However, they certainly couldn't have expected 𝗵𝘃𝗪 to grab them by the arm and demand answers for something. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" "What? Don't play dumb with me, Deku. No one can find you outside of class. How the fuck are you doing that, you shitty Deku? And I know that it's not your shitty rooftop spot. I checked." 𝗵𝘃𝗪 was pulling tighter and tighter on Izuku's arm. Izuku froze. The reason was the stealth training they were doing with Aizawa, but they couldn't say that. "I've been practicing," they said, but something about their response must have tipped him off. "There's no way you got that good by yourself. A shitty Deku like you could never be that good. Someone's helping you." "Who the fuck is it?" Izuku was stuck. They couldn't exactly say that they were being trained by a pro hero, but 𝗵𝘃𝗪 was smart. He would see through any lie they tried. So they settled for a half-truth. "Someone who just wanted to help me." 𝗵𝘃𝗪 snarled at the vague answer. "Well, whoever they are must be stupid to help a useless Deku. What kind of stupid motherfucker are they? I bet they're just as weak and pathetic as you." Now, Izuku could count the number of times they'd ever gotten angry on one hand. First, when they were thrown out, a mixture of hurt, scared, and angry had been what kept them alive that night. Another time, the first time 𝗵𝘃𝗪 had hurt them. They had been too young to have the depressing lack of self-esteem they currently possess. And lastly, the first time someone had called them useless. All of these times were long before they'd started training with Aizawa and Yamada, who were very insistent that the way they were being treated was horrible, and they were starting to believe it. Izuku wouldn't say they'd started being angry after that. No, it was more like annoyance, in the way you get annoyed at a dog barking. You know they can't help it, and you wouldn't fault the dog for barking, but you still find it irritating. Which was certainly different than complete and utter acceptance, and it was, according to Aizawa, better. All that to say, it was a complete surprise, even to themselves, when they punched 𝗵𝘃𝗪 in the face. 𝗵𝘃𝗪 reached a hand up to his nose, and his fingers became wet with blood. He stared at the crimson liquid for a few seconds that Izuku should have used to run away, but they were pissed. How dare he even suggest that? Their mentor was anything but weak or pathetic. 𝗵𝘃𝗪 snapped out of his stupor and his face contorted into an ugly snarl as he leaped at Izuku, hands outstretched as explosions set off in his palms. Izuku dodged with ease. 𝗵𝘃𝗪 was like a fumbling baby compared to Aizawa, and Izuku could hold their own against him. 𝗵𝘃𝗪 stood no chance. Izuku dodged another swipe, kneeing 𝗵𝘃𝗪 in the gut, causing him to double over in pain. They took the chance to try and run. Of course, they hadn't accounted for the commotion that the altercation would cause. Several students were now surrounding the pair, and others were trying to help 𝗵𝘃𝗪. Izuku was surrounded, and there was no way they could escape what was about to happen. 𝗵𝘃𝗪 stalked towards them, arms raised and explosions crackling. Izuku was now running like a caged rabbit, trying desperately to avoid 𝗵𝘃𝗪's attacks, which would have been easy had it not been for various other students also trying to trip them up. They noticed that a few teachers had also come to watch, and they did nothing. Despair started clouding in their mind. Eventually, they slipped up, someone managed to grab them, and suddenly they were being barraged from all sides. Pain bloomed across their body as they were pinned helplessly. They wondered if they would even make it out of this alive. It had been 20 minutes past their usual time and Wraith still hadn't shown up. And 𝗀𝗏 had already begun searching the nearby alleyways for the kid. A part of him was desperately hoping the kid had just forgotten or was running late because they got detention. But as 20 minutes turned into 30, then 40, then 50, and then an hour, 𝗀𝗏 couldn't deny that something truly terrible must have happened to the kid. He first checked the areas near the rooftop, but after that was unsuccessful. He started going out in a single direction for a few blocks before doubling back to the rooftop to make sure Wraith hadn't gone there. After the fourth search, desperation took over and he started being more frantic in his search, investigating every little noise, hoping to catch even a glimpse of Wraith, worst-case scenarios already playing out in his mind. He had just completed what had to have been the 10th search. This one was closer to the nastier part of town, and was going to head back to the rooftop when he heard shuffling in an alleyway. Odds were that this was another cat, but 𝐀𝐻's panicked mind couldn't care less. If there was even a chance it was them, he had to check. Inside the alley, 𝐀𝐻 looked around. There appeared to be no one, but then more shuffling sounded from behind the dumpster. 𝐀𝐻 took a look and almost gasped when he saw an unconscious child, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Their hair was matted by deep red blood. They were wearing what looked to be an elementary school uniform, also soaked with blood. 𝐀𝐻 immediately started gently shaking them, trying to wake the child up. Eventually the child opened their eyes. They stared past him initially. "Hey, can you hear me?" Their eyes focused a little at the sound of his voice, and their eyes quickly snapped completely open when they saw him. "Hey, kid, I'm not going to hurt you." He was cut off by the kid raising their hands. "Aizawa-sensei." 𝐀𝐻 froze. No way. No, Wraith. The kid, his kid, nodded. 𝐀𝐻 had to resist the urge to envelop them in a hug, relief and terror flooding his brain at the same time. 𝐀𝐻 picked them up in his arms and started walking through the back alleys, trying to go as fast as possible without further hurting his kid. "Okay, kid, I need you to stay awake, okay? Let's get you to the hospital." Wraith's eyes widened and they tried to shake their head. "Kid, please, you're bleeding out. We need to get you medical attention." Wraith managed to move their hands long enough to sign won't help. Quirkless 𝐀𝐻 felt rage simmering under his skin as he realized that they were right. No hospital was going to treat a quirkless child, even if they were dying. "Okay, no hospitals, but I have a co-worker who would be willing to help." 𝐀𝐦 was not someone he talked to a lot, but her contact was in his phone, and she was the only other option he could think of. "We'd have to go to my apartment," he said, already calling Hizashi's number. Wraith nodded and then winced when the action caused their injuries to be aggravated. After about 15 seconds, which were 15 seconds too long in 𝐀𝐻's mind, Hizashi finally picked up the phone. "Hey Shu, what's up? I'm sending you my location. Get in the car and get over here as fast as you can." "Wait, what? 𝐀𝐻, what's going on? Are you okay?" The concern in his husband's voice would have been comforting if 𝐀𝐻 wasn't currently holding a dying child. "Wraith is hurt, really badly. Can't go to a hospital. Call RG and tell her to meet us at our apartment." "Shit, okay. I'll be there as soon as I can." Hizashi had barely enough time to call recovery girl and tell her the basic details of the situation before he was in the car and driving to where 𝐀𝐻 was, probably breaking a few laws in the process. Thankfully he got there in only 17 minutes. 𝐀𝐻 quickly got in the back seat with a child. That must be Wraith. He had to drive a little slower on the way back, not wanting to risk worsening Wraith's injuries, so the drive home took about 20 minutes. Each second felt like an eternity. By the time they got back to their apartment, Wraith was barely conscious, and it felt like another eternity until recovery girl showed up. In the meantime, 𝐀𝐻 had done his best to try and stop the bleeding, but there was still a lot of blood. 𝐀𝐦 checked over the kid as quickly as she could, growing more and more horrified by the second, as she uncovered lacerations, burns, stab wounds, and a broken rib. "Well, I can't heal much, but I can just about stabilize them. The rest is gonna take time," she said, giving Wraith a small kiss on the forehead. "And bandaging up the wounds that didn't heal. Call me when they have a bit more energy and I can heal them up completely." "Got it," she said sternly. Hizashi and 𝐀𝐻 nodded, both silently praying that their kid would be okay. But there was nothing they could do except wait. It took about an hour of both of them keeping watch over Wraith before Hizashi suggested that they take shifts. It wouldn't do to have both of them be dead tired when the kid woke up. Begrudgingly, 𝐀𝐻 had agreed. Although he still insisted on taking the first shift, he had to make sure the kid wasn't going to get worse. Hizashi agreed and went to bed, reminding 𝐀𝐻 to wake him up in an hour. 𝐀𝐻 almost retorted that he obviously would, before realizing that he probably wouldn't. Not with the kid's current state, not if he could just keep watch the entire night. Still, an hour later he woke up Hizashi and went to sleep, only after triple-checking that his husband would wake him up if anything happened. "Okay, I get it, really Moonlight. If anything happens to our kid, I'll wake you up." "They're not our." 𝐀𝐻 stopped himself. Who was he kidding? Wraith was their kid. Only emotionally for now, but Hizashi had been right. The second he got an identity for Wraith, he was adopting them, if they were all right with it, of course. He knew they had to at least get legal guardianship of the kid. Whatever home they were in was clearly unfit for a child, and given how horrible the foster system usually was, never mind the quirkless aspect, they weren't going to let the kid get put in the system. Hizashi smiled at him knowingly. "Just get some sleep, dear. and try not to worry too much. That advice was completely disregarded, of course. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get the image of his kid's battered and broken body behind the dumpster. Impossible scenarios running through his mind. Maybe if he had just gotten there quicker, 𝐸𝐻 wouldn't be unconscious right now. Maybe if he'd looked in the right places, he could have stopped them from getting hurt entirely. He logically knew that this was a dumb train of thought. Nothing could change the past, so there was no point in bothering about the what-ifs. But the less rational part of him, a part that was much more of him than most people suspected, was terrified for his kid, terrified about what would happen if their situation took a turn for the worse. Izuku felt the haze of sleep slowly leave their mind, stings of pain rushing through their body as they slowly became aware of their surroundings. They were laying on something soft. That wasn't right. They had been next to a dumpster. There couldn't have been anything this soft near it. It also felt like there was something wrapped around their body. The only thing that they'd expected was the familiar metallic stench of blood. They blearily opened their eyes and noted that they were no longer outside. Instead, there was a dim light somewhere off to their left, and they were staring up at a gray ceiling. Why were they indoors? Whose house was this? How long had they been asleep? Their first instinct was to pretend to be asleep. Their second was to look around and see where exactly they were. But before they could do either of those things, they heard a quiet gasp next to them. 𝐸𝐻, and suddenly a hazy recollection of events of earlier, collapsing next to the dumpster, being picked up by Aizawa, someone bandaging them up. They were in Aizawa and Yamada's apartment. Izuku quickly sat up, ignoring the stabbing pain that the action caused. Aizawa was sitting on a chair next to the couch. It was weird seeing him in something other than his hero costume, although his normal outfit didn't seem all that different given that it was completely black, except for the cartoon cat face in the middle of his sweater. Izuku honestly thought it was hilarious that the most feared underground hero was completely obsessed with cats. They reached up to make sure their hoodie was still in place before they froze. Remembering that they were wearing their school uniform, Aizawa could see their face. He knew who they were. Their breathing quickened. If Aizawa knew their identity, he could find their parents. They didn't want to go back. They didn't want to burden them with their presence. 𝐸𝐻. Izuku snapped out of their spiral, still panicking, but they could hear Aizawa's voice calmly counting out a breathing pattern. They tried their best to follow it, slowly calming down. They hadn't realized that they'd curled in on themselves. Slowly uncurling, they immediately noticed that Aizawa had gotten closer. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't send me back. Hey, kid, calm down. We're not going to do anything just yet. You're still hurt. We can discuss what to do after you're healed, okay?" Izuku nodded hesitantly. At least it gave them some time to figure out how to talk them out of contacting their parents. Izuku properly looked around the room for once. The room was fairly large. It made sense if this was the living room. And there were 3 doors presumably leading to other rooms, as well as one short hallway that appeared to lead to the kitchen. The living room was decorated all around with pictures of Aizawa, Yamada, a woman with dark purple hair, and a man with blue hair and pipes coming out of his elbows. Some of the more recent-looking pictures also included someone with two-toned blonde and blue hair who was always close to the purple-haired woman. There were also a few photos of cats scattered around, which made sense given how much Izuku had heard about the pair of stray cats that Aizawa had insisted on keeping. And the dim light they'd seen earlier was just the sunrise through the window signaling the dawn. While they were looking around, they heard someone else move into the room. They turned and saw Yamada standing in the doorway looking exhausted before he noticed them, and then his entire face lit up like a light bulb. "Hey little listener, you're awake." Hisashi smiled at 𝐸𝐻. He was a bit miffed that 𝐲𝐻 hadn't immediately woken him up when their kid had opened their eyes. But he couldn't be too mad seeing as his husband was currently hovering close to them and clearly still worrying over them. Besides, he'd woken up anyways thanks to the commotion that he was now guessing was caused by 𝐸𝐻 waking up, also reminding him that he'd been careless and fallen asleep with his hearing aids in. Hisashi walked over to the couch and stood next to 𝐲𝐻 to give the kid some space. "How are you feeling, kid?" 𝐸𝐻 responded by shrugging their shoulders, an action which probably hurt a lot given their injuries, but they didn't seem to be bothered by it. Hisashi would be more concerned if he didn't know exactly why the kid had such a high pain tolerance. "Well, in that case, I'm gonna go make breakfast. Do you have any allergies?" 𝐸𝐻 shook their head, so Hisashi left the other two to talk while he made a simple omelet. After breakfast, which was the best Izuku had even had, but that was probably not saying much considering they hadn't had a home-cooked meal in years. Still, it felt weirdly cozy. They'd expected it to feel awkward or uncomfortable, but it was just like they'd always been there. The conversation flowed smoothly from one topic to the next, and while they were hesitant to add their own thoughts at first, they quickly found that they could easily interject without interrupting anyone. They had offered to help with the dishes, but Aizawa waved them off and said that he could do them alone. And Yamada had given them some clothes so that they could clean themselves up a bit. Honestly, the idea of a hot shower was incredibly appealing right about now. 𝐲𝐻 walked back into the living room to find his husband on the couch, and no 𝐸𝐻 in sight. "Sunshine, where's 𝐸𝐻?" he asked, sitting next to him. Oh, they're probably having a shower right now. I figured I could at least let them clean up before we talk. Speaking of, what exactly are the options here? The foster system is obviously out, and there's no way we're letting the kid go back to their parents, right? 𝐲𝐻 knew the answer and also knew that he had several words for 𝐻𝐻's parents if he ever met them in person, and none of them were kind. Definitely not. Any parent who doesn't notice their kid getting hurt almost every day is being willfully neglectful at best. I think we both know the best option is if they stay with us, or someone else they trust as much as 𝐲𝐻 wished the kid would stay with them. 𝐬𝐻 was right. If the kid had somewhere safe they wanted to stay, 𝐲𝐻 couldn't stop them. Well, whatever happens, we need to open an investigation on their parents for child abuse, unless that would cause more trouble for the little listener. Damn it, 𝐲𝐻 knew his husband was correct, but he really wanted to make 𝐲𝐻's parents hurt. He sighed. He would hold off on hunting them down until 𝐲𝐻 said it was okay. The discussion slowly steered away from 𝐲𝐻 for a while, until 𝐲𝐻 heard footsteps and looked up to see 𝐲𝐻, wearing a pair of pants too long for their legs and a shirt with the Put Your Hands Up radio logo on it that hung from their frame. And 𝐲𝐻 could finally see what the kid actually looked like. Their hair was green and curly, and it looked a little odd in places, like someone had done a bad job at cutting it. Their previously dull eyes were a shining emerald. And the most surprising of all, they had freckles. Both 𝐲𝐻 and 𝐬𝐻 had the exact same thought: our kid is adorable. 𝐲𝐻 sat down on one of the chairs next to them, fiddling with the hem of the shirt when a small meow caused them to look up. A large fluffy brown cat flopped on the ground next to Izuku's feet. Yamada tried to reach out and pet her only to get clawed at, prompting him to stare at her incredulously seriously. Come on, Mop. I know you hold a grudge, but this is getting ridiculous. So this is Mop. Yamada once said that Mop was really distrusting of strangers, but apparently she was fine with Izuku, and apparently Yamada had done something to piss her off. Where's Shadow? They had been told very little about the other cat, but they had seen a picture of her. She was a very tiny black cat with large yellow eyes, probably hiding somewhere. Don't worry, she'll show up eventually. But before they could continue that conversation, Aizawa tapped the table to get their attention, looking pointedly at Yamada, whose face turned red with embarrassment. And Aizawa turned to look at Izuku. So now that everyone is settled, we need to discuss a few things. Izuku almost forgot about the talk they were supposed to be having. They really didn't know how they were going to get out of this. Aizawa sighed, perhaps sensing their hesitance. Look, kid, we don't have to do anything drastic now. Could you just tell us how you got so hurt? Izuku fiddled with the shirt again. Before looking up at their teachers, they sighed and started signing. It was my fault. I punched my bully, and I think I just made it worse. You punched your bully. Why exactly did you do that? He's smart. So when I was getting better at avoiding him, he figured out that I was being trained by someone. He doesn't know who, but he said some really mean things about you, and I got really mad and kinda just punched him. Izuku looked down sheepishly. So you punched him only because he was talking bad about me, but not because he was bullying you? Aizawa was silent for a good few seconds before shaking his head. Okay, we can deal with that later. For now, we need to figure out what's going to happen from here. We've got two options. Well, technically three, but I don't think you want to end up in the foster system. Izuku shook their head rapidly. I had heard some real horror stories about the system. There was no way they were getting put in there. Right, well, the other options are going back to your parents, or being put under the legal guardianship of an adult that you trust. I'm going to be honest, neither of us are keen on sending you back to your parents, since they apparently just don't notice when their child is hurt. Izuku had to stifle a laugh at that. Is something funny? I haven't seen my parents since I was 4. 𝐲𝐻 could feel his brain blue screen at that, and he could tell that 𝐬𝐻 had the same reaction. 𝐬𝐻 recovered first. Hey little listener, do you mind elaborating on that? Well, that was when I was diagnosed quirkless, and they didn't want a useless kid like me, so they threw me out and told me never to come back. Okay, forget harsh words. When 𝐲𝐻 found 𝐻𝐻's parents, he was going to murder them. Actually, forget that. A quick death was too much of a mercy. He was going to tear them apart piece by piece and make them regret every decision they've ever made. 𝐲𝐻 took a deep breath. There was time to plot murder later. Right now they had a kid to deal with who probably didn't want to think about their parents too much. Okay, so that's off the table. I guess the only option would be to put you under a legal guardianship. Is there anyone you'd trust to take care of you? Izuku thought about it. They didn't really have anyone. The only people they'd ever really trusted were Aizawa and Yamada. But what if they didn't want Izuku? They didn't want to impose. Still, they had no other answer. I mean, I have 2 people I'd trust, but I don't know if they'd want me. And I don't really want to upset them. Aizawa sighed. 𝐻𝐻, listen, if they really care about you, they'll take you. Who are they? Izuku took a deep breath, weighing the options of being truthful, and eventually deciding that they had no other option. You two. They braced themselves for the inevitable rejection. Kid, of course we'll take you in. Izuku's head snapped up, wide eyes looking at Aizawa, and then at Yamada, who nodded. Yeah, little listener, we'd love to have you. Izuku could feel themselves tearing up. Yamada moved closer to them, arms open, silently asking permission. Izuku nodded and Yamada hugged them gently, being careful not to aggravate their injuries. Eventually another pair of arms wrapped around both of them as Aizawa joined the hug. The three of them sat there for a good few minutes, Izuku feeling unwilling to leave the warm embrace of their teachers. Eventually they let go of each other. Yamada was the first to break the silence. Okay, so if you're staying with us, we're gonna have to get you some clothes, and anything else, you can stay in the guest room. We'll have to get some decorations for it. How about we go shopping in the afternoon? We're also going to have to get whatever you have from wherever you were staying until now. Speaking of which, where were you staying? Aizawa asked. A warehouse about a block from where you found me. Oh. And my bag and notebook is probably still by the dumpster. Both adults looked incredulous at that, Yamada blinking repeatedly like he thought he misheard them. And Aizawa just sighed. All right, kid, we can go do that now, and we need to get this guardianship properly legalized. We'll need your name for that though. He looked at Izuku questioningly. Izuku smiled softly. My name is Midoriyizuku. They gave their sign name as well. Yamada smiled. All right, Midoriya, but was interrupted by the kids shaking their head. I don't like my family name. Could you use my given one instead? Of course, Izuku. Let's go get your stuff and then we can either stop by the station on the way back, or we can do that tomorrow if you like. Izuku nodded. Let's do it today. Aizawa spoke up. We also have to let Shuzenji know that the kid's awake so that she can heal them properly. Right, well, I'll call her now. Yamada stood up to call whoever Shuzenji was, while Aizawa somehow managed to find Shadow and introduced her to Izuku. And while everything was happening, Izuku couldn't help but feel like everything was finally gonna be alright. Izuku sat in the back of the car as they drove to the warehouse. Aizawa was in the driver's seat, saying that he didn't trust Yamada's driving skills with a child in the car. Meanwhile, Yamada was pouting in the passenger seat. They thought that he might have been talking everyone's ears off if Izuku wasn't half asleep from being healed by Recovery Girl earlier. Which, by the way, was so cool. They really wanted to ask more about how her quirk worked, but even with their mentors there, they really didn't want to risk it. Plus, Aizawa had warned them that Recovery Girl knew nothing about them being a vigilante or their quirklessness. As far as she was concerned, Izuku was just some kid that Aizawa had found behind a dumpster. They'd already stopped by the dumpster and grabbed Izuku's backpack and notebook. And now they were pointing out the direction to the warehouse, which was a bit difficult since they'd never had to consider the roads before, having mostly navigated through the alleys and rooftops. Still, they made it there, and they managed to grab the measly stash of clothes they had as well as all 7 of their other notebooks. Yamada had looked around the warehouse and managed to find their stash of medical supplies, which were nearly used up. This apparently warranted a horrified gasp and an almost whisper of "How is this kid still alive?" Although Izuku couldn't really tell why, it was just a dozen or so empty burn cream containers, a pair of random scissors they'd found somewhere, mildly dirty bandages that had been in a hospital's dumpster, and only a little bit expired tube of wound cream as well as a medical needle and some thread to stitch himself up. Aizawa had just looked generally distressed the whole time. Azashi had no idea how Izuku had survived so long living like this. It was a miracle the kid hadn't gotten sick and died. Speaking of the little listener, they seemed to have gotten everything they wanted from the warehouse, which was concerningly little, enough that all of it, minus the notebooks, could fit in the worn-out yellow backpack they always carried around. They had tried to take their medical stash as well, but both Hisashi and Shouta had insisted otherwise. The 3 of them also needed to stop by the police station to report the whole abandoned child situation and gain legal guardianship while they were at it. The process would probably be smooth once someone found Izuku's quirk status, a situation in which the legal system's tendency to overlook quirkless people would work in their favor. Hopefully they wouldn't run into any trouble. Izuku was a bit nervous walking into the station. Police were usually something they avoided, both as Wraith and Izuku, and they didn't particularly want all those eyes on them. However, the second they stepped into the station they could sense Yamada moving closer to them, almost shielding them from all the people around, making sure he was always nearby while Aizawa did all the necessary talking. The station itself wasn't that bad, and they weren't quite paying attention until they got to one of the desks. Aizawa had started what sounded like a formal report on their situation, leaving out a few details like the location of their warehouse and, of course, exactly how they met, since that would mean bringing their vigilantism into the discussion, instead skipping to yesterday's chain of events. The officer had looked completely horrified, right up until she asked Aizawa for Izuku's details and their quirk status had to be brought up. Her expression quickly became one of neutral indifference after that, and Izuku heard her mention how sorry she was for Izuku's parents. Yamada looked like he was about ready to start a fight right then and there after that comment. Luckily for everyone, Aizawa's glare was enough to shut her up and she stuck to processing the guardianship change. Apparently their parents never bothered to legally cut ties with them, but that wasn't really an issue since they had abandoned Izuku and could not be considered viable options. So Aizawa and Yamada were now officially their legal guardians for the time being. As they were finalizing everything, a man walked up and greeted Aizawa in a friendly way. Who was this and how did he know their mentors? He didn't look like a cop. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but he clearly worked here. The most likely answer was that the man was a detective, a thought that was confirmed when Aizawa called him detective. 𝐲𝐸 could feel that this was gonna be a headache. Tsukachi wasn't stupid, and with his quirk he was almost impossible to lie to. 𝐲𝐸 was going to have to word his sentences very carefully to avoid triggering it. You know it's unusual to see you in here during the day. What's going on? The detective asked. Then he noticed Izuku and his eyes widened. Wait, when did you and Yamada get a kid? First of all, Izuku isn't our kid, we're their legal guardians. How on earth did that happen? I mean, no offense, but you're not exactly the first person that comes to mind for taking care of a kid. 𝐲𝐸 had to think through his reply. As much as he trusted Tsukachi as a colleague, he didn't know if the man would react poorly if he even suspected 𝐲𝐸 of lying. And 𝐲𝐸 wasn't about to say anything that even hinted Izuku being wraith, so he settled for something that was technically true. I found them behind a dumpster. Tsukachi stared at him blankly for a few seconds. Excuse me? Care to elaborate? Not really. We have to get going anyways. 𝐲𝐸 practically dragged Hisashi and Izuku out of the station and back into the car. Who was that? Why were you acting all weird? Izuku asked. Tsukachi Naomasa, a detective for the MPD, and the reason I was acting weird is because his quirk lets him know when people lie. It's a very difficult quirk to bypass. The less I said, the better. 𝐲𝐸 could see the exact moment that Izuku's eyes lit up as he described Tsukachi's quirk. There was going to be a lot of questions. Hisashi almost didn't notice when the car had stopped outside the mall, too engrossed in his conversation with Izuku after 𝐲𝐸 gave up trying to keep up with their rapid-fire questions. The little listener was already figuring out ways that a lie detector quirk could possibly be bypassed, as well as trying to figure out what the quirk counted as a lie. The general theory, based on anecdotes from Hisashi and 𝐲𝐸's various cases with him, was that it wouldn't trigger as a lie if the person genuinely believed that they were telling the truth. It was an afternoon on a weekday, so hopefully the mall wouldn't be too busy, since most people were at work, but he figured it was still for the best if they did this as quickly as possible so as not to overwhelm Izuku. So the two of them went inside and started looking around for all the necessary things. Clothing was the tricky part. It took a lot of convincing to get Izuku to just pick out what they wanted. At first, they just followed him around, looking at a few things longingly but not really saying anything. Eventually, after he called them out on it a few times, they eventually just started pointing things out. It turned out that Izuku had an interesting sense of humor. Hisashi definitely giggled when the kid showed him a plain t-shirt that had pajamas written on it. He also insisted that they get at least one pair of slightly fancier clothes, which he had to pick out since Izuku thought that all of it looked the same. Far simpler was getting things to decorate Izuku's room. All of the stuff they picked was hero-themed, like a space bedsheet designed after 13, and a poster of Midnight. He was sure Anan and Nimuri would be flattered. Hey Izuku, isn't your notebook almost full? Izuku followed Yamada's gaze to a shelf full of notebooks and other stationery. He was correct. Analysis number 8 only had a few pages left, enough for maybe 2 or 3 more entries. They nodded. Then we should get some more. Pick 3 of the ones you like, Yamada said, waving in the direction of the shelf. There were quite a few notebooks that caught Izuku's attention. But in the end they picked 2 of the more simple notebooks, similar to analysis number 8. They would have taken 3, but some of the notebooks were hero-themed, and they found a present mic one. Yamada thought it was adorable. Once they got everything they needed, they headed back to the car where Aizawa was napping in the backseat. Yamada laughed at the sight. Hey Shu, love, wake up, Aizawa just grumbled and curled up like a cat. Alright then, I guess I'll have to drive. That got Aizawa's attention real quick. He bolted upright and glared at Yamada, who just laughed at him. There you are, come on, let's go home. The drive back was full of noise as Hisashi chattered about anything and everything that he could think of. 𝐲𝐸 would have been annoyed if it was anyone else, but he was used to his husband's talkative nature by now, and Izuku seemed to be completely enthralled by whatever stories Hisashi telling. It was getting late when they got back home, so Hisashi immediately got started on dinner as 𝐲𝐸 and Izuku unpacked everything. Izuku still seemed a bit overwhelmed with the change from a decrepit warehouse to an actual room, but they seemed to be adjusting okay. Alright, that's everything. I'll let you settle in. I'll be in the living room if you need me. Okay. Izuku nodded and 𝐲𝐸 left them alone. A ringing sound alerted him to someone calling his phone. It was Nimuri, not entirely unusual for her to call at random times just to catch up on the latest gossip. He answered the call. Are you two okay? Is someone dying? Is the world ending? Nimuri's panicked voice sounded from the phone. What? Nimuri, what's going on? 𝐲𝐸 was confused. What was she talking about? You weren't at work this morning, and Nedzu told us that you were taking 2 days off. You never even take 1 day off, let alone 2. Oh, right, that. We're fine, Nim. Something important just came up. Something important. What is it? Do I need to come over? 𝐻𝐴 thought that was a terrible idea. Him and 𝐻𝐴 had taken those days off because they didn't want 𝐿 to have to deal with too many people so soon. Nimari was their best friend, but she could be a lot to handle sometimes. First, don't come over, and second, you'll have to find out on Thursday like everyone else. Really? Oh fine, keep your secrets, see you on Thursday. 𝐻𝐴 knew that she was going to lecture them when she found out. But it was fine as long as she didn't cause too much trouble for 𝐿. But that wasn't something that he needed to think about for now. All that mattered right now was that 𝐿 was safe and happy. Why do you even bother? Useless thing. Nobody wants you. The world would be better off without you. They don't care about you. Stop being such a burden. The figures that surrounded them were blank, their faces only having wide, toothy grins as they taunted them. They tried to cry out, to argue, to say anything, but their mouth wouldn't move, like it was glued shut. The figures circled closer and closer as the words started cutting into their skin, leaving bloody gashes that covered the world in crimson, and the figures started laughing. Look at them. Weak. Can't even take an insult. Pathetic creature. The figures reached forward and started tearing their skin off in chunks, fingers digging into them, removing flesh bit by bit. They felt tears roll down their face as their throat was taken. Then their heart was pulled out of their chest. It was being held by one of the figures, one who radiated rage and anger and smelt like burning sugar. They wished to cry, to tell him to stop, but they sat helpless as the figure crushed their heart in his fingers, the blood dripping through his fist. They felt their limbs go numb as the other figures started taking off their fingers, then their knees, their legs and arms, piece by piece, until they couldn't move. The figures seemed to get bored. Somehow that felt worse than anything else. After all, a doll is still useful as a plaything, but a broken one was truly useless. They felt someone beside them, someone who felt like safety and protection, but not for them. They couldn't reach out and find them, and that someone walked away. They cried what was left of their tears. The last thing their mind could feel was the happiness of everyone around them, all around but never coming close enough to reach them. 𝐿 woke up gasping for breath. Their hands clawed at their chest where their heart was still intact. It was a nightmare. 𝐿 knew that. They'd had this particular one a few times now. They calmed themselves down, their shaking form wrapped in soft, star-covered blankets as they slowly became aware of their surroundings. Right, they were in the guest room in Aizawa and Yamada's apartment. It was supposed to be theirs, but some part of them still felt that this was all too good to be true, no matter how much it seemed like their mentors, now guardians, really did want them around. 𝐿 slowly untangled themselves from the blanket as they looked out the window above their bed. It was still dark outside, maybe close to dawn. They got out of bed, still shaking from the nightmare, knowing that the figures didn't entirely lie. Even if two people truly cared about them, that was all they'd ever have. They still didn't have a place in the world, and maybe a few months ago, they would have just accepted that and moved on. But now, a small spark inside them said that they could make a place for themselves. But it was a small spark, and right now, after that nightmare, it was dangerously close to being snuffed out. No matter how much they trained, no matter how hard they tried, no matter how many times their mentors had told them that they could be a hero, they still had trouble truly believing it. They had somehow ended up in the kitchen. 𝐿 didn't know how or why. Their legs just carried them here. They heard a small noise from the counter, and a sleepy-looking shadow blinked her large eyes at them. 𝐿 gently picked her up and she started purring softly. They sighed, knowing that nobody else would be awake right now. They had checked the clock. It was 2 a.m, and while Aizawa would have been awake if he had gone on patrol last night. But 𝐿 knew that both him and Yamada had taken the day off, so he'd probably be asleep. They wondered what they should do. They didn't really want to stand around in the dark until their guardians woke up. They did have their hoodie in the room. It wouldn't hurt to go out for a quick run, right? They creeped back to the room, making sure not to make a sound. They set Shadow down on their bed and quietly changed out of their pajamas into their hoodie, a pair of black pants, and their bright red shoes. They snuck out of the window only to go right back when they realized they'd almost forgotten their face mask. They climbed onto the fire escape of the nearby building and scanned the area, realizing that they had no idea where anything was. That made sense. They were several blocks away from their usual patrol area, but that just meant they'd have to explore and memorize this place. So they set off running, feeling the familiar cold air of the night as they hopped from rooftop to rooftop. 𝐻𝐴 stood in the living room, drinking coffee from a cat mug. It was 4 a.m, so 𝐻𝐴 was still asleep. Most likely 𝐿 was also asleep right now. So he was just standing around with Mop, who was making herself a nuisance. Although surprisingly, Shadow was nowhere to be found. He had wandered around for a few minutes before he heard a thud come from 𝐿's room as well as a loud yowl, presumably from Shadow. Suddenly, on high alert, 𝐻𝐴 cautiously knocked on the door. Kid? He asked, worry already creeping into his mind. The sounds of scuffling and the closing of a window caused him to tilt his head curiously. Then the door opened and 𝐿 stood in the doorway in their wraith outfit. Hey Aizawa, I can explain, 𝗀𝗏 just sighed, sensing that this was going to be a headache. You went patrolling. 𝐻𝐸 shook their head before pausing and looking down sheepishly. Well, I just wanted to go for a run, but I did stop a mugging. It was only one though. And why exactly did you even go out in the first place? 𝗀𝗏 asked, now noting down 𝐻𝐸's movements to see if the kid was injured. Luckily they appeared normal. But 𝗀𝗏 knew that only meant they didn't have a serious injury. 𝐻𝐸 shuffled their feet for a bit, seemingly trying to decide what to say. Just tell me what happened. I'm not going to get mad or judge you. I had a nightmare. 𝐻𝐸 seemed to start shaking a bit. Do you want to talk about it? 𝐻𝐸 shook their head. Do you want to be alone for a bit? 𝐻𝐸 shook their head frantically. Okay then. How about I make us both some coffee and you can play with the cats for a while? 𝐻𝐸 nodded and picked up 𝗀𝗏 from where she'd been pacing on their bed. ― walked into the living room to find 𝗀𝗏 and 𝐻𝐸 curled up on the couch petting the cats. And was that coffee? Did 𝗀𝗏 give their kid coffee? ― sighed internally, knowing that on one hand, they probably needed it seeing as they must not have slept that well, given that they were wearing their wraith outfit. Did they go out last night? On the other hand, 𝐻𝐸 was 9, and giving a literal child coffee was a terrible idea. Eventually, he just decided to leave them alone and get started on breakfast. Hopefully today wouldn't be too exciting. 𝐻𝐸 needed a chance to get used to the place after all, especially since they had no idea what to do tomorrow. Most likely they were going to have to take the little listener to work with them, and hopefully they wouldn't get into trouble, and hopefully none of their co-workers caused them any trouble. Not to mention dealing with Nedzu's inevitable curiosity was going to be a pain. The rest of the day seemed to go by far too quickly for 𝐻𝐸. After breakfast, the three of them had decided to stay at the apartment for the day, and they just generally coexisted for the day, sometimes starting up conversations about whatever came to mind. 𝐻𝐸 generally started becoming more and more relaxed as the day went. Dinner was great, and Yamada had started telling a funny story about one of the heroes he'd worked with lately. Eventually the topic turned to his and Aizawa's co-workers at UA, and he seemed to remember something. 𝐻𝐸, I think I forgot to tell you earlier, but we might have to take you to work with us tomorrow, since we can't leave you alone and most of our friends are too busy to watch you for the day. Is that all right with you? 𝐻𝐸's eyes widened and they nodded rapidly. Who wouldn't want to go to UA? All right, if you're sure then I'm super sure. 𝐻𝐸 interrupted Yamada, who just chuckled at their enthusiasm. 𝐻𝐸 honestly couldn't wait. 𝐻𝐸 woke up to a cat's tail in their face. Mop had apparently decided to flop onto them sometime last night. They got out of bed, making sure not to startle Mop, who looked rather annoyed that her perch had moved. They were still a bit sleepy, but that quickly faded when they remembered that they were going with their mentors to UA. Today, they rushed to get ready and practically sprinted into the living room, almost running into Aizawa, who was standing next to the table and going over some files. Good morning, Aizawa. 𝗀𝗏 stared at 𝐻𝐸 tiredly. This kid was way too excited for today. Mornings are never good. How do people even have this much energy in the morning? He grumbled under his breath. 𝐻𝐸 grinned and 𝗀𝗏 had to blink a few times because of how blindingly bright it was. 𝗀𝗏 was glad that the kid had relaxed a bit. They weren't as jumpy or nervous as they usually were. Yesterday probably helped get them accustomed to the apartment. Hisashi had been nervous, worried that being surrounded by that many people would be too much for the kid, but it seemed that he had nothing to be concerned about. The kid had always loved heroes. Still, they were still strangers, and the kid took so long to trust him and Zashi. Hopefully this would go smoothly. Hisashi finally noticed that 𝐻𝐸 was awake. Morning, little listener. You excited for today? 𝐻𝐸 nodded vigorously as they sat down for breakfast. Hisashi was surprised that 𝐻𝐸 wasn't more nervous about today. They had practically bounced the entire time through breakfast and couldn't sit still during the whole car ride. Instead, striking up conversation with him about all the heroes working at UA and gushing about how awesome the school was, as well as all the heroes that had graduated from its hero course. 𝗀𝗏 had once again insisted on driving, so it took longer than it should have. But eventually they reached the school, its familiar gates opening like the doors to a grand castle once both heroes scanned their employee IDs. 𝐻𝐸 looked back at the gates of UA in awe. This was the best hero school in the country, and they were standing right inside its walls. They were inside UA. They looked around, adjusting their backpack. The main grounds were enormous. The building in front of them was the main school, but they could see other buildings further away. They had no idea what they were, but they were huge. It seemed that UA was just as grand as its reputation. It was honestly kind of intimidating. The inside of the main building seemed closer to a normal school. Long hallways with various doors leading to different classrooms, and the doors were all huge, probably to account for all kinds of mutation quirks. And one set of doors they passed by seemed like it had been blown up several times, given the charring and dents in it. But other than that, it seemed pretty normal. The hallways were all quiet though, since none of the students had arrived. Eventually they reached what was labeled as the teacher's lounge, and Izuku could hear commotion from behind the door. And they could also hear Aizawa and Yamada being mentioned by name, something about a secret. They opened the door. Their mentors went in first, and immediately everyone went silent. Izuku saw several heroes exchange glances. Speaking of the heroes, there were so many. They could name most of them. Snipe, Midnight, Hound Dog, 13, Cementos, Ectoplasm, and Power Loader. There was also a hero they couldn't identify, but he was probably an underground hero like Aizawa. Suddenly Midnight piped up, "All right, you two have a lot of explaining to do. What on earth was so secretive that you couldn't even tell me? I mean, I'm your best friend. Surely you could have told me something, at least given me a hint. I mean, at least you can explain yourselves now. Is that a child?" Midnight was interrupted in her rant by Power Loader's surprised question. All eyes turned to Izuku, and they could feel themselves wilting under the examining gazes, until Yamada stepped in front of them and Aizawa glared at everyone in the room. Quirk activated, which made most of them snap out of their staring, most, except for Midnight. "When did you two get a child? Wait, is this what you were hiding from me?" She sounded genuinely upset. Aizawa sighed and began to explain. "Nimiri, relax. First of all, this is Izuku. They're not our kid, we're just their legal guardians. Secondly," he turned to everyone in the room, "if any of you try to hurt them, I will personally hunt you down and make you suffer." That seemed to get a reaction out of all of them, mainly fear and confusion. Snipe spoke up, seemingly voicing everyone's thoughts. "That's nice and all, but where did you two get a child?" "We found them behind a dumpster. Ask Shuzenji, she'll back us up." "A dumpster?" Ectoplasm sounded incredibly concerned. "Yes, Katu, a dumpster. I found them while I was on patrol, and since they didn't have any safe place to go, we took them in." While most of the other heroes were questioning Aizawa and Yamada, Izuku couldn't help but stare in awe at some of them, silently wondering if they would answer some questions. When they noticed that Hound Dog had been silent throughout the whole conversation, instead silently staring at them, Ryo wasn't entirely expecting the small child to walk up to him. Normally children ran in the opposite direction on account of him looking absolutely terrifying to most. He had wanted to say hi to them, but the way the kid was acting, it was clear that they weren't used to all this attention, and he didn't want to scare them. "Hi, my name is Izuku, okay?" The kid was signing. Luckily Ryo knew JSL. He wouldn't be a good therapist if he didn't. "Hello Izuku. It's nice to meet you." The kid's eyes lit up when he responded in sign. "You know sign? That's cool. Not a lot of people know sign." Izuku smiled at him, and goodness, that was a bright smile. Their excitement was almost infectious. "Oh, by the way, I wanted to say that you're a really cool hero." Ryo titled his head. "You're not scared of me?" "No, you're a hero. You save people. Why would I be scared of you?" Oh, that was not what Ryo had expected. This kid was Sunshine incarnate. He couldn't figure out the reason for Aizawa's threat earlier. Who on earth would want to hurt this kid? He tried to give the kid a smile. Not particularly natural for his snout, but most people didn't read happiness any other way. Izuku frowned at him. "Are you trying to smile? That looks difficult. You're good at reading people, aren't you?" That was unusual for a kid who looked like they were still in elementary school. He noticed the scars scattered on the kid's arms. They looked like they'd been done at different times. Ryo's seen plenty of abused and bullied kids before, and now that he was actually looking, he could see the way that they were trying to make themselves smaller, and almost never looking directly at anyone when they were having a conversation, and they had been reacting to things going on outside of the conversation. Things that either required enhanced hearing to notice, or a constant awareness of one's surroundings. Izuku nodded. They looked like they wanted to say something, but seemed too nervous to do so. "You have a question?" "It's nothing." Izuku seemed to shrink in on themselves even further. Ryo figured that he should drop it. Izuku thought that Hound Dog was really nice, even nicer than Yamada said he was. And he's a cool hero. They had an entry on him in their notebook. And he didn't only fight villains, he also did search and rescue with his enhanced senses. They had so many questions about his quirk, but they didn't want him to hate them, so they kept their mouths shut. Meanwhile, the others had apparently finished questioning their mentors and seemed to have mostly calmed down. All except for Midnight, who was apparently lecturing Yamada about keeping secrets from friends, and 13, who appeared to be trying to drag Midnight away, unsuccessfully. Izuku saw Power Loader in the corner trying to ignore everything that was going on, Cementos looking on at the commotion tiredly, and Ectoplasm seemingly encouraging Midnight's ranting. Eventually Midnight stopped to catch her breath and was immediately wrapped in Capture's scarf, effectively shutting her up. "Are you done?" Aizawa asked her. Midnight nodded and he released her. "Can I introduce myself to the kid?" "Sure, they'll only respond in JSL though." And toned down the energy. Yeah, I get it." She walked over to Izuku. "Hi, I'm 𝐀𝐦 Nimiri. Nice to meet you, Izuku." "Nice to meet you, 𝐀𝐦-san. Oh, you're such a sweetie, aren't you?" Someone's phone started making noise and several people in the room visibly tensed. Yamada, Aizawa, power loader and the hero that Izuku couldn't recognize. Cementos chuckled as he silenced the alarm and gathered up some papers and left the room. Power loader quickly followed suit, muttering something about unsupervised demons. The other three just grabbed a stack of papers and ran out of the room. Yamada stopped for a second to make sure that 𝐀𝐻 would watch them, to which she agreed. Izuku waved at 𝐀𝐻 to get her attention. "What is it, sweetie? What just happened?" "Oh, homeroom is about to start, so the homeroom teachers had to get to their classrooms in time. Ishiyama always makes sure of it." Izuku nodded and decided to pass the time by sitting in the corner and make some extra entries in their notebook, including a full page of rambles on the other hero, trying to figure out who he was. Probably an underground hero, not just cause Izuku hadn't heard of him, but also cause he seemed to be in the same state of constantly alert that Aizawa was. Something Aizawa said was from being an underground hero. As for his quirk, Izuku had no idea. He had those tusks, but that could mean anything. His costume had interesting-looking gloves and that thing on his back, probably support gear, but still they couldn't tell what they were used for. Still, other things were easier to pin down, like the fact that he was probably a close-range fighter as evidenced by his build and the small scars all over his skin. Several hours passed, no one seemed to bother them. Some of the heroes left and at some point Yamada came back, but had to leave rather quickly to teach the English class. Later Aizawa and the other hero came back, both looking more tired than earlier, and they looked to be arguing about something. And apparently this was normal, as everyone in the room either sighed or rolled their eyes. Izuku couldn't tell what exactly they were talking about. Some names were tossed around that they didn't recognize and incidents they had no idea about were brought up. But it sounded like they were trying to see who had the most troublesome class. "Can, Aizawa, could both of you keep your pettiness out of the teacher's lounge?" Ectoplasm said. He looked annoyed. Well, at least Izuku had a name to put on their list of information. Several other teachers trickled back and as classes wrapped up, Izuku could hear the cheers of the students outside in the hallway. Surprisingly, no one had bothered them yet, perhaps because of Aizawa's threat that morning. But Izuku was still observing Can, looking for any sign of what his quirk could be. They weren't getting much, until they noticed that he was absent-mindedly waving his hand around, a clear sign of a type of kinesis quirk, which were a subsection of emitter quirks that allowed its user to mentally control things, usually a particular type of thing like water or fire, sometimes more unusual like plants or technology. Now the question was, what was he manipulating? Izuku had to strain their eyes to see, since his desk was across the room from them, but they could just about make out a few drops of some red liquid. Was that blood? Cool. It also explained the weird gloves, probably a way to easily access blood. Now question was, what were the details of his quirk? That was almost impossible without seeing it in action or asking him directly. A presence shifted in the vents. Izuku noticed that Aizawa, Can, and Hound Dog stiffened in their seats. They almost looked worried. Something small dropped down from the vent. A small furry white animal, wearing a suit, the principal of UA, Nedzu. "Good evening, staff." "And Izuku, am I a dog, a mouse, or a bear?" "I am the principal." They could see Aizawa and Yamada's gaze flick from the notebook to Nedzu and back again rapidly. Power Loader sighed. "I don't like where this is going." 13 nodded in agreement. Izuku was confused. Surely it wasn't that bad. Then their mind flashed back to the several times Aizawa had referred to Nedzu as a bastard rat god, and they realized it probably was that bad. "Don't worry, I am only here because I couldn't help but notice how intelligent little Izuku here is now." Most people looked confused, and Aizawa was looking around frantically before his eyes zeroed in on a spot in the ceiling behind Izuku. They looked up and noticed a camera blinking back at them. From its perspective, it would have seen everything that Izuku had written for the past few hours. Nedzu cackled as he saw the gears turn in Izuku's head. "Yes, I noticed all those notes of yours. That book is rather interesting, and I couldn't help but notice how quickly you identified Vlad King's quirk even without any prior knowledge." "Wait, what?" Can looked halfway between confused and concerned. "What is he talking about?" Izuku looked down at the 2 pages of notes they'd made on Can, and quickly added the information on his hero name to that list. Yamada groaned. "I was hoping this wouldn't happen." By now everyone else had stopped working and was now fully focused on Izuku and Nedzu. Izuku debated what to do, and figured their notes were probably going to be seen anyways, so they might as well get some answers out of it. They got up and reluctantly approached Can's desk, setting their notebook down in front of him, a notebook. But Can went quiet as he read further. "Holy shit, how did you?" Nedzu cleared his throat. "Yes, well, as you can see, Izuku here has quite the talent for analysis, and I was simply too intrigued to not talk to them." By now almost everyone else had gathered around and began reading their notes. "This is incredible," Ectoplasm exclaimed. "This kid's got to have some kind of intelligence quirk like Nedzu, right?" I asked myself the same thing, but imagine my surprise when I found their quirk registry only to discover that they are quirkless. Izuku froze. Out of the corner of their eye they noticed Aizawa's hand go to his capture scarf, and Yamada was glaring daggers at the principal. Everyone else seemed to freeze as well, brains processing the new information. And all at once several people started talking. 𝐀𝐻 and ectoplasm were saying that it was impossible for a kid these days to not have a quirk. Power loader. Cementos and Snipe were muttering amongst themselves and staring at the notes. And the others, Hound Dog, 13 and Can, were looking at Izuku with concern. Everybody quiet, Yamada shouted, managing to get everyone to stop talking. Yeah, Izuku's quirkless. If any of you lot have a problem with that, I suggest you leave this room immediately. Nobody left. But Izuku could see both 𝐀𝐻 and ectoplasm look at them with what they knew was pity. Pity for the weak little Deku. Well, at least it was better than being hated. No one else seemed to notice though, so they ignored it. Nedzu turned and spoke to Izuku. I apologize. I did not mean to cause a commotion. I simply wished to know whether you planned on improving that skill of yours. You could have a future in professional analysis with some development. Thank you, Nedzu-san. I want to improve, but I'm not planning to go into professional analysis. Oh, I want to be a hero immediately. They heard protests from ectoplasm and 𝐀𝐻, that it was too dangerous for them, that they'd get hurt, and they were silent. Aizawa and Yamada tried to speak up, speaking specifically to their friend, but Izuku had had enough. Everyone in their life told them they couldn't be a hero. But they'd been a vigilante for the past 2.5 years. They'd found 2 people who believed in them, wanted to help them be a hero. Hell, they could hold their own against Eraserhead. So why couldn't they be a hero? Just because they were more likely to get hurt. Every hero risked their lives fighting for justice. What was so different when they wanted to do it? Izuku slammed their hands on the table, silencing the fight. I don't care. I know that it's going to be tough, but why shouldn't I try? If I work hard enough, harder than anyone else, why couldn't I be a hero? There are so many heroes with non-combative quirks. If they can learn to fight villains, why couldn't I? I'll tell you, there is no reason I can. No, I will be a hero. To help the people that everyone else forgets about. The ones who need a hero to save them because they can't save themselves. Isn't that what being a hero is about? Everyone was silent. 𝐀𝐻 looked embarrassed while ectoplasm looked genuinely impressed by their little rant. Nedzu had a glint in his eye, and their mentors looked at them with beaming pride. Well, the kid's determined. I'll give him that. Snipe finally broke the silence, and I kinda have to agree with them. People slowly started agreeing. Until Nedzu piped up, well, that was a passionate speech, and personally I don't see the flaw in their logic. In fact, he spoke directly to Izuku. If you would like, I wish to mentor you. A mind as quick as yours can be a deadly weapon if sharpened. The mammal reached out a paw for a handshake. They looked back at Aizawa and Yamada. They simply shrugged as if to say it was Izuku's choice. Izuku returned the handshake, and everyone felt an ominous shift in the balance of the universe. Excellent. We can start tomorrow. Bring your notebook and any other analyses you have. Of course, Nedzu-sensei.